The man who fixed the impossible. Some people walk into a room and get overlooked. Elijah Brooks walked onto a dock and got laughed at. By millionaires, by engineers, by cameras rolling live. What happened next silenced every single one of them. If you've ever been judged before you were given a chance, this story is for you. Drop your city in the comments and hit that like button. Let's see how far this story travels. Now stay with me, because this is where it gets real. The call came at 11:47 on a Tuesday night. Elijah Brooks was on his back beneath a 2009 Chevy Silverado, a flashlight clamped between his teeth and both hands buried in an oil-slick differential that had no business still being on the road. The garage was his, technically, though the bank held a more convincing claim to it than he did. 3 fluorescent tubes hung from the ceiling, one of them flickering with the persistence of a dying star. The radio in the corner played old Stevie Wonder at a volume low enough not to wake the apartment above, where his 10-year-old daughter Nia was asleep under 2 quilts with a school permission slip still unsigned on the nightstand. He almost didn't answer. The number was unlisted, and unlisted numbers at midnight were either wrong numbers or trouble. He'd had enough of both to last a reasonable lifetime, but the differential wasn't going anywhere, and something, the same quiet instinct that had kept him employed and alive through 11 years of single fatherhood, made him wipe his right hand on his work pants and accept the call. This Elijah Brooks? The voice on the other end was female, clipped, and entirely too alert for the hour. Master mechanic? Marine certified? Depends on who's asking and why they're asking at midnight. My name is Dana Reyes. I'm the logistics coordinator for Sterling Global Industries. We have a situation at Harborview Marina. Our CEO's personal yacht, the Eclipse, experienced a complete systems failure 6 hours ago. We've had a team of engineers on board since sunset. Nothing. We need someone who can look at this differently. Elijah pulled himself out from under the Silverado and sat up on the creeper. The concrete floor was cold through his jeans. I'm a mechanic, he said. Not a marine electrician, not a systems engineer. We're aware of what you are, Mr. Brooks. We've also reviewed your certification record, your repair log from the Eastport Fleet Maintenance contract, and the review Captain Dominguez filed after you salvaged the Meridian's propulsion system 18 months ago. You have a way of seeing problems that other people miss. A pause. We're offering double the standard rate, per hour, plus a completion bonus if the Eclipse is operational by morning. Elijah was quiet for a moment. He looked up at the flickering fluorescent tube. He thought about the orthodontist appointment from last Thursday, and what Dr. Patel had said about Nia's crossbite, and the number, $4,200, that had been sitting in his chest like a stone ever since. What time do you need me there? He said. Look, Harborview Marina, at 2 in the morning, was a different world from the city that surrounded it. The streets outside were ordinary, cracked pavement, chain link, a 24-hour laundromat on the corner with 3 machines running and no one inside. But past the security gate, the marina opened into something else entirely, a floating neighborhood of obscene wealth, where the vessels lined up in their slips were larger than most of the buildings Elijah had grown up in. He drove his 2004 Ford F-150 through the gate, gave his name to the guard, and followed the access road to Pier 7. He could see the Eclipse from 100 yards away, not because it was lit up with activity, though it was, but because it was simply that much larger than everything around it. 180 feet of white fiberglass and tinted glass, 4 decks, a helicopter pad on the stern, and the kind of quiet authority that came from costing more money than Elijah would earn in 50 lifetimes. He parked, pulled his toolbox from the truck bed, and walked toward the dock. There were, by his count, somewhere between 30 and 40 people gathered around the yacht's entry point. Some were clearly engineers. They had the particular distracted intensity of people who had been staring at schematics for too long and were starting to argue with each other. Some were marina staff standing at a careful distance, professionally uninvested in the outcome. A few were press. He recognized the camera rigs before he recognized the network logos, which struck him as strange until he remembered that the Eclipse belonged to Victoria Sterling, and Victoria Sterling was the kind of person whose yacht malfunctioning was apparently a news event. He was 15 feet from the crowd when the laughter started. It wasn't immediate. It rippled. First one person, then a second, and then enough of them that it became a sound, low and amused and not quite bothering to conceal itself. Elijah kept walking. He'd been laughed at before. He understood, on an almost mechanical level, what was producing it. His truck, his clothes, the toolbox that had more scratches on it than the yacht had crew members, and the simple fact of him, a black man in work pants arriving at a billionaire's crisis with no team, no clipboard, and no lanyard identifying him as someone who belonged there. He was almost to the gangway when he heard her voice. "Is this a joke?" Victoria Sterling was standing at the top of the gangway, and she was precisely what he'd expected from the name and the yacht. Late 40s, impeccably put together even at 2 in the morning, with the specific brand of confidence that didn't come from capability alone, but from decades of never being told no by anyone whose opinion she valued. She was wearing a charcoal blazer over a silk blouse, and her dark hair was pulled back with the precision of someone who had a stylist on retainer and wanted you to know it. She was looking at Elijah the way you look at something delivered to the wrong address. "Dana." She said the name without raising her voice, which somehow made it worse. "You called a handyman?" Dana Reyes appeared from somewhere behind her employer, a compact woman in her 30s with a tablet under her arm and the expression of someone navigating a minefield in business casual. "Mr. Brooks is a certified master mechanic with marine endorsements. Captain Dominguez recommended—" "Captain Dominguez is not here," Victoria said. She looked back at Elijah. There were cameras 30 feet away, and she didn't even glance at them. "I have 30 engineers on this vessel. I have a team from Helix Marine Systems. I have 2 men who helped design this ship's propulsion architecture." She gestured at Elijah's toolbox with something approaching disbelief. "And you brought a toolbox? From what decade?" The laughter came again. More of it this time. Someone muttered something Elijah didn't catch, and whoever was standing next to them found it funny. Elijah set his toolbox down on the dock. He looked up at Victoria Sterling. "You want me to leave," he said, "or you want your boat fixed?" Something shifted in her expression. Not much, a millimeter's worth of recalculation, but she was a woman who had not gotten to where she was by being incapable of arithmetic when the numbers actually mattered. She turned away without answering him. He took that as an invitation and walked up the gangway. The Eclipse was remarkable, even broken. Elijah had worked on fishing boats and cargo vessels and research ships and recreational cruisers, and he had developed over the course of his career a particular relationship with machines that other people found difficult to explain. It wasn't mystical, it wasn't instinct in the supernatural sense. It was, more precisely, the result of having spent 11 years listening to mechanical systems instead of talking over them. A habit born partly from professional discipline and partly from the long, quiet hours of raising a child alone, when you learned to read what wasn't being said out loud. The Eclipse was talking. You just had to know how to listen. He stood in the engine room for 4 minutes before he touched anything. This was, in his experience, the step that most people skipped. The room was crowded. 2 engineers from Helix were running diagnostics on the primary drive interface. A third was on a satellite call with someone who sounded German and increasingly frustrated. And a fourth was sitting on an equipment case with his head in his hands looking like a man reconsidering his career choices. The banks of displays that lined the starboard wall were alive with error codes, hundreds of them, layered in cascading logic trees that the Helix engineers had been attempting to untangle for 6 hours. The systems were sophisticated, cutting-edge integration of mechanical drive, digital control, and AI-assisted navigation management, and every one of them was showing red. Elijah looked at the displays for about 45 seconds. Then he turned away from them. "Hey!" One of the Helix engineers, a tall man in his mid-30s with an expensive watch, and the demeanor of someone accustomed to being the smartest person in any given room, was looking at him. "You need to be in the secondary bay if you're going to—" "What's the maintenance schedule for the shaft coupling assembly?" Elijah said. The engineer blinked. "The shaft coupling is a mechanical component. The failure is clearly electronic. The AI override protocols alone have generated—" "What's the maintenance schedule?" Elijah said again. It wasn't a question the second time. A long pause. "We haven't reviewed mechanical maintenance documentation. That's not where the problem—" "Okay," Elijah said. He found the maintenance log himself. It was a physical binder. Most vessels this sophisticated kept both digital and paper records, in a cabinet on the port side of the engine room. He pulled it out, set it on a workbench, and began reading from the beginning. The Helix engineer watched him for a moment, then went back to his laptop with an expression that suggested he found the whole thing faintly absurd. Wob. The binder told a story. Maintenance logs always did, if you knew how to read them as a narrative rather than a record, looking not just for what had been done, but for what had been deferred, what had been noted and deprioritized, what pattern of small decisions had accumulated over time into a single decisive problem. Elijah read for 20 minutes without touching a single tool. He found it in an entry from 8 months ago. A routine inspection of the port side drive shaft had noted a 0.3 mm misalignment in the coupling, within manufacturer tolerance, and therefore flagged as a low-priority maintenance item. A technician had signed off on it, recommended correction at the next scheduled dry dock, and moved on. The correction had never happened. Over the following 8 months, the Eclipse had continued operating. The AI-assisted drive management system, a sophisticated piece of technology designed to optimize performance and protect the mechanical components, had detected the misalignment and had begun compensating for it, automatically, continuously, making 10,000 small adjustments over hundreds of hours of operation, each one designed to protect the shaft from additional wear. The problem was that each adjustment generated a data point, and each data point triggered a monitoring protocol. And each monitoring protocol intersected with 3 others. And the intersections generated alerts. And the alerts triggered safety responses. And the safety responses modified the drive parameters. And the modified parameters created new misalignment readings. And the new misalignment readings triggered new compensatory adjustments. It was a closed loop, a mechanical whisper that had been growing in the machine's digital nervous system for 8 months, compounding quietly until, 6 hours ago, it had simply become too large for the system to contain. Every AI circuit in the yacht had tried to resolve it simultaneously, generated a logic conflict that none of them could arbitrate, and shut the entire system down rather than risk operating in an unresolvable state. Hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of electronics, frozen by a misalignment smaller than the width of a human hair. Elijah closed the maintenance log. He picked up his torque wrench. He worked alone. Not because he was asked to, but because it was simply what the job required. The Helix engineers watched him from across the engine room with expressions that cycled through skepticism, curiosity, and something they were careful not to let become too visible, which was interest. He removed the access panel on the port side coupling assembly. He measured. He documented his measurements in a small notebook, actual paper, a habit he'd never abandoned, because paper didn't run out of battery. He applied calibrated pressure to the adjustment collar in 3 incremental steps, checking alignment after each one with a precision gauge he'd owned for 9 years. The misalignment was, in the end, 0.31 millimeters. He corrected it to 0.02, well within the tolerance window that would no longer trigger the monitoring system's compensatory response. Then he walked to the main drive control panel and manually cleared the error cascade, layer by layer, working backward through the logic tree from the bottom up, rather than attempting the top-down resolution that the Helix engineers had been trying all night. It took him 43 minutes from the moment he opened the maintenance log to the moment he pressed the system restart sequence. The Eclipse came alive beneath his feet, not all at once. First the auxiliary systems, then the primary power distribution, then the drive management interface cycling through its startup checks, each system reading green as it came online, the cascade of failures reversing itself in the sequence it had originally fallen. The Helix engineers went very still. The man who'd been sitting with his head in his hands lifted it. The German voice on the satellite call stopped mid-sentence, and then the engine, real and mechanical and utterly certain, turned over and settled into its idle rhythm, and the Eclipse was running. Elijah put his torque wrench back in his toolbox. He was aware, in the way you become aware of a room's temperature only after it changes, that the engine room had gone completely silent. He closed the toolbox latches. He stood up. He looked around at the men who had been running diagnostics for 6 hours and found them looking back at him with expressions that were, in various proportions, composed of disbelief, professional respect, and the particular discomfort of intelligent people who have just watched someone solve a problem they couldn't. He nodded at none of them in particular. He picked up his toolbox and walked toward the companionway. On deck, the night had shifted. Word moves fast in a crisis, and the news that the engine room was no longer dead moved faster. The crowd around the gangway, the engineers, the press, the marina staff, the assorted observers who had gathered to watch very expensive professionals fail to solve an expensive problem, had gone quiet in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. Victoria Sterling was standing at the starboard rail. She had her phone in her hand and she was not looking at it. She was looking at Elijah as he came up through the companionway hatch. Behind her, the cameras were still rolling. The engineers who had spent the night on board were beginning to filter up from below, coming out onto the deck with the specific energy of people who have been overtaken by an event and are not yet certain how to position themselves relative to it. Someone on the dock started clapping, then a second person, then more, building into something that was not quite an ovation. There was too much bewilderment in it for that, but was unmistakably genuine. Elijah walked across the deck toward the gangway. He was not performing anything. He was tired, and his right shoulder ached from the awkward angle he'd had to hold for the coupling adjustment, and he was thinking about whether he'd remembered to sign Nia's permission slip before he left. He was almost to the gangway when Victoria Sterling said his name. "Mr. Brooks?" He stopped. He turned around. She was 5 feet away from him, and for the first time since he'd arrived, she was looking at him in a way that suggested she was actually seeing him. Not the truck, not the toolbox, not the clothes. Him. "How?" she said. It was a simple question, almost unguarded. He had the sense that she hadn't entirely intended to ask it out loud. Elijah considered her for a moment. Behind her, the cameras were recording. The engineers were listening. The dock crowd had gone still enough that he could hear the water moving against the hulls. "The machine told me," he said. "I just listened." He turned and walked down the gangway. His truck was where he'd left it, patient and unremarkable in the middle of all that expensive darkness. He opened the passenger door, set his toolbox on the seat, and got in. He sat for a moment before starting the engine. The marina was still around him. The Eclipse sat in its slip, running, its lights reflecting on the black water in long, broken lines. He thought about Nia, about the permission slip, about the $4,200 that was now, one way or another, going to happen. He started the truck. He drove home through the pre-dawn quiet, and when he got back to the garage, he slid back under the Silverado, retrieved his flashlight from where it had fallen, and finished the differential. He was in bed by 5:30. Nia would need breakfast in 2 hours. By the time Elijah woke up, the video was on its way to 3 million views. He didn't know that immediately. What he knew at 7:53 a.m. was that his phone was making sounds it didn't usually make, that Nia was already downstairs eating cereal and watching something on the school tablet, and that the coffee he was making was, by any objective standard, the most important thing happening in his immediate world. He poured a cup, stood at the kitchen counter, and looked at his phone. There were 47 missed calls, text messages from numbers he didn't recognize, running off the bottom of the screen. 3 voicemails from area codes he'd never seen, and a text from Dana Reyes that read, "Call me when you're awake. Victoria Sterling wants to meet. This morning, if possible." He drank his coffee. "Dad," Nia appeared in the kitchen doorway. She was wearing her school uniform, which she'd managed to put on correctly except for 2 buttons that were in the wrong holes, and her hair was in the lopsided ponytail she always attempted independently on the mornings when she decided she didn't need help. She had Elijah's eyes, dark and level, the kind that took things in without broadcasting what they were thinking, and her mother's cheekbones, which Elijah had loved from the first moment he saw them. "Why are there people outside our garage?" Elijah went to the front window. There were, in fact, 4 people on the sidewalk across from the garage. One of them had a camera. Another was talking into a phone. They weren't a crowd, but they were more than the ordinary population of this particular block at this particular hour. "Some stuff happened last night," Elijah said. Nia came to stand beside him. She was exactly the right height to fit under his arm, which was where she went, and he put his arm around her automatically. "The boat thing?" she said. He looked down at her. "How do you know about that?" "Keisha's mom texted Keisha this morning, and Keisha texted me." She tilted her head up to look at him. "She said you fixed a really big boat and that a really rich lady was mean to you." "That's approximately correct." "Were you scared?" "No." "Were you mad?" He thought about it. About the laughter on the dock and Victoria Sterling's face at the top of the gangway, and the particular texture of being dismissed in public by someone who hadn't looked at anything but the surface of him. "For a minute," he said, "but I had work to do." Nia was quiet for a second. Then, "Are we going to be on the news?" Maybe. She considered this with the gravity of a 10-year-old weighing all relevant factors. Can I wear my blue sweater? Despite everything, the 47 missed calls, the cameras across the street, the text from Dana Reyes, the $4,200 hanging over all of it, Elijah laughed. He laughed the way you laugh when a child reminds you that reality is both larger and smaller than you've been treating it. "Yeah," he said, "you can wear your blue sweater." He went back to finish his coffee. He called Dana Reyes. He made Nia's lunch, a turkey sandwich, apple slices, the specific brand of crackers that she liked, and that he always remembered to buy even when the grocery budget was tight. And he signed the permission slip, which was for a field trip to the Natural History Museum, which Nia had been mentioning every day for 2 weeks. And then he went back to the window and looked out at the street, and at the marina district beyond, and at the particular quality of morning light coming off the bay. And he thought about the machine, and the misalignment, and the 8-month silence that had grown into a failure. And he thought about all the other kinds of misalignment, the ones nobody measured, the ones that got deferred and deferred again and accumulated quietly until the whole system locked up. He had a meeting with Victoria Sterling in 3 hours. He went to get dressed. The garage was officially closed for the morning. He put the sign up in the window, back at noon, and told Marcus, his part-time helper, to hold any urgent calls. Marcus was 19 and not particularly given to curiosity, but even he had noticed the people on the sidewalk, and he looked at Elijah with the expression of someone who wanted to ask something and had not quite decided to risk it. "I'll explain later," Elijah said. "Is it bad?" "I don't think so." "You think so?" Elijah looked at him. "I'll explain later, Marcus." He drove to the marina, the same route as the night before, reversed in daylight, the city showing its ordinary face, coffee shops opening, delivery trucks double parked, the elementary school 3 blocks from his garage releasing its morning wave of small humans with backpacks. He drove carefully, as he always did in school zones, and stopped fully at every stop sign, a habit that had nothing to do with caution and everything to do with the particular vigilance he'd maintained for 11 years of driving with a child in the world. The marina gate guard recognized him now. That was different from last night. Last night, there had been a check of his name against a clipboard. This morning, the guard just waved him through, and he thought he caught a glimmer of something. Not deference, not exactly, but acknowledgement, in the man's expression. He parked in the same spot as before. The dock was quieter in daylight. The press cameras were gone, though he could see 2 people with phones positioned near the Eclipse's berth who had the specific posture of people trying to look like they weren't doing what they were doing. Dana Reyes met him at the gangway. "Good morning." She had the press competence of someone who had been awake since 4 and was managing it professionally. "Thank you for coming." "I said I would." "Ms. Sterling is on the upper deck. She'd like to speak with you privately before the briefing." Elijah looked up at the yacht. In daylight, it was even more extraordinary. Not beautiful exactly, but dominant in the way that things built purely to express power tend to be. Everything about it said, "I can afford this," in a voice that was not interested in subtlety. "Privately," he said. "Yes, just the 2 of you." He nodded. He followed Dana up the gangway. The Eclipse moved gently under his feet, a slight roll from the harbor traffic, everything in its systems running smoothly now. He could feel it through his shoes. The specific living quality of a machine operating correctly, all its parts moving in calibrated relation to each other. He thought about 0, 31 millimeters, about how small a thing has to be to eventually stop everything. He followed Dana to the upper deck. Victoria Sterling was waiting. The upper deck of the Eclipse had a view of the entire harbor. Elijah stood at the rail for a moment after Dana Reyes left them, looking out at the water. The morning was clear, with a light wind off the bay and the particular luminous quality of a November sky after a night of cold air. Victoria Sterling was seated at a deck table. There was coffee. She had not poured herself any, which he noted without knowing exactly why. "Sit down, Mr. Brooks," she said. He sat. She looked at him across the table. In daylight, Without the charged atmosphere of the crisis and the cameras and the crowd, she was still formidable. But she was also, he could see now, tired. Not physically. The kind of tired that lived deeper. "I want to understand what you found," she said. "You've already had the technical report from the Helix team." "I have. I want to hear it from you." Elijah leaned back in his chair. He told her, straightforwardly, the way he'd have told any client, the maintenance log, the 8-month-old notation, the misalignment, the AI compensation cycle, the cascading logic conflict, the shutdown. He spoke in plain language, not because he was simplifying for her benefit. She was clearly capable of technical comprehension, but because plain language was how he always spoke about engines. Precision didn't require complexity. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "The misalignment was flagged 8 months ago," she said. "Yes." "And the dry dock schedule was deferred?" "Yes." She picked up her coffee cup and put it down without drinking. "I approved that deferral. The dry dock schedule conflicted with the Monaco trip." Her voice was level, factual. She seemed to be trying on the truth of it, testing its weight. "A 0.5 mm misalignment against the Monaco International Yacht Show." 0.31 millimeters, Elijah said. She looked at him. "Excuse me?" "It was 0.31 millimeters, not 0.5 millimeter." He said it without sharpness. It was simply the correct number. The maintenance notation estimated half. The actual measurement was 0.31. Something moved across her face. He couldn't quite read it. "Less than half," she said. "Yes." "And that?" She stopped, restarted. That was enough to do all of this. Given enough time and the right system to interact with. "Yes." She was quiet again. Below them, on the dock, he could hear marina workers beginning their morning tasks. The ordinary sounds of a working day. "The Helix team," she said finally. 30 engineers. Why didn't they find it?" "They were looking at the software," Elijah said. "The software was the symptom. It was doing exactly what it was designed to do, detecting a problem and trying to fix it. They kept trying to resolve the software's response without asking what it was responding to." He paused. "It happens. When something's complex enough, it's easy to forget that it's still built on simple physical foundations. And you didn't forget. I read the maintenance log." She made a sound that was almost a laugh, but wasn't quite. "That's it? You just read the maintenance log?" "That's it. 30 engineers with combined industry experience of..." She stopped herself. She pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of her nose for a moment, then lowered her hand. "You know what the humiliating part is? They didn't read it because they assumed the problem was too sophisticated for the maintenance log to be relevant. They assumed the complexity of the symptom meant the cause had to be equally complex." "Most people do," Elijah said. "Do you?" "No." "Why not?" He considered the question. He thought about 11 years of working on machines that other people had given up on. He thought about the particular education of having no safety net, of being the only person in a situation where something had to work, because if it didn't work, the alternative was not just inconvenience, but genuine loss. "Because in my experience," he said, "the simple things are usually the ones that get ignored. Not because they're not important, because they're not impressive." Victoria Sterling looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Last night, on the dock, what I said." He waited. "I was wrong." She said it without qualification. "No, I'm sorry if... No, I apologize for any... No architecture of conditional accountability. Just... I was wrong. I was dismissive and arrogant, and I publicly humiliated you in front of cameras. And I did it because..." She stopped. Tried again. "I did it because I took one look at you and decided you didn't belong here. Before you said a word. Before you touched a tool." Her voice was steady, but he had the sense that the steadiness was effortful. "That's not acceptable. Not for me. Not for me." Elijah looked at her. He thought about the laughter on the dock, the particular way she'd looked at him at the top of the gangway, the casual, not even hostile dismissal of it, the difference between hatred and indifference and which one left a deeper mark. "It happens," he said. "It shouldn't." "No," he agreed. "It shouldn't, but it does. And not just to me. It happens every day. To people who are standing in front of their own version of that gangway. Every day." People who know exactly what they're doing and are never asked to prove it because no one thinks to ask. He leaned forward slightly. The cameras made it visible, but the cameras weren't the point. The point is what happens in all the places cameras aren't rolling. She held his gaze. He could see her processing it, not just hearing it, but actually taking it apart and examining the pieces. "What do you need?" she said finally. "From me. Today. What do you need?" Elijah thought about it. He thought about Nia's braces. He thought about Marcus, 19 years old, working part-time in a garage, who was good with his hands in a way that had never been pointed in any particular direction. He thought about the dock worker he'd seen at the base of the gangway last night. A young man, maybe 22, 23, watching the whole thing with an expression that was harder to look at than the laughter because it was more complicated. Not amusement, something like recognition. "I need to think about that," Elijah said, "and I need you to mean it when you ask." She nodded, just once, clean and certain. "I'll mean it," she said. He believed her, not because he was naive, and not because the morning light was soft, and the harbor was beautiful, and the moment had a quality that invited trust. He believed her because he had 11 years of practice reading machines, systems that couldn't lie, that communicated only in truth, that showed you exactly what they were. And there was something in Victoria Sterling's voice in that moment that registered the same way. A system that had found its actual malfunction, not the symptom, the source. He stood up from the table. "I'll be in touch," he said. "Mr. Brooks?" He turned back. She was still seated, her hands flat on the table, looking at him with an expression he hadn't seen from her before. "Thank you, not for last night, for this morning." "Yeah," he said. He walked back down through the yacht, past the engine room where the drive systems hummed in calibrated harmony, everything in its proper alignment, down the gangway, across the dock. He got in his truck. He had to pick up Nia from school at 3:15. He had a Silverado differential to finish. He had 47 missed calls to decide one by one whether to return. He started the engine. He drove. The bay was gold in the morning light, and the Eclipse sat in its slip, running perfectly. And somewhere out in the city, a girl in a blue sweater was sitting in a fourth-grade classroom doing fractions, and none of these things were connected except that they all, in some essential way, were. Elijah drove through it all, steady and unhurried, the same man he'd been yesterday and the day before, and the 47 years before that. He drove home. The video hit 5 million views before noon. Elijah found out the way he found out about most things that didn't originate in his own life. Indirectly, through the reactions of other people. Marcus told him first, standing in the garage bay with his phone turned outward like evidence. The screen showing a thumbnail Elijah recognized as the dock at Harborview Marina, his own back visible in the lower left corner, toolbox in hand, walking toward the gangway. 5 million, Marcus said, since last night. Elijah looked at the number. He looked at it the way he looked at an unfamiliar engine specification, acknowledging it, filing it, moving on. "Hand me the half-inch socket," he said. Marcus stared at him for a full 3 seconds. Then he reached into the toolbox and handed over the socket. "You're not going to... The Silverado's not going to finish itself." "Elijah, 5 million people watched you." "I know what happened, Marcus. I was there." Marcus put his phone away with the energy of a person who has a great deal more to say and is exercising genuine restraint. He was a good kid. He learned fast, worked clean, and had the particular gift of knowing when to be quiet, which was, in Elijah's estimation, one of the most undervalued qualities a person could possess. They worked through the morning. The differential got finished. A brake job came in. A retired schoolteacher named Mrs. Galvez, who had been bringing her Buick to this garage for 11 years, and who greeted Elijah with the same warm formality she'd always used, as though he were a professional she trusted, which was exactly what he was. If she'd seen the video, she didn't mention it. He respected her for that, in the particular quiet way he respected most things. By 11 o'clock, his phone had received 231 text messages, and he had stopped counting. By noon, 3 television producers had called the garage landline. Marcus had taken careful notes for each one, writing their names and numbers on the yellow legal pad they kept by the register, his handwriting getting progressively more astonished looking as the morning went on. At 12:15, a florist delivered flowers to the garage. The card read, "From the Eastport Fleet Maintenance Team." We always knew. Elijah read it once, set it on the workbench, and went back to the Buick's rear drums. At 12:47, his sister called. Her name was Renata, and she lived in Atlanta, and she had the specific personality of someone who had appointed herself the family's designated pragmatist, which she expressed through a combination of deep affection and zero tolerance for anything she deemed foolishness. She had raised 2 children, run a healthcare practice for 16 years, and had, in Elijah's experience, never once in her life failed to have an opinion. "Baby brother," she said before he could speak, "are you watching this? I'm working. You need to stop working and watch what's happening." "Renata." "The comments, Elijah. Have you read the comments?" He could hear her moving, the particular rhythm of her walking through a busy space. "People are writing essays, pages, about what this meant to them, about their dads, their grandfathers, about standing in line for jobs they were qualified for and being looked at like they walked in by accident." Her voice shifted. "There's a man in Birmingham who wrote that he watched the clip 4 times because his father was a mechanic for 30 years and nobody ever treated him like he was worth listening to. And he said watching you walk up that gangway, knowing what they were going to say and walking up anyway, he said it felt like something." Elijah was quiet. He was sitting on the stool by the workbench. The Buick was in the bay, patient and half-finished. Through the open garage door he could see the sidewalk, where the small cluster of people with phones had grown to perhaps a dozen, maintained a respectful distance, but was undeniably present. "I just fixed a boat, Renata." "I know that. You know that. But for some people it was more than a boat." A pause. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine." "Is Nia okay?" "She wanted to wear her blue sweater." "She's fine." Renata laughed. It was a real laugh, warm and helpless. "Of course she did." Then more quietly, "What are you going to do?" "I have a meeting with Victoria Sterling's team this afternoon," Elijah said, "and I have 3 more vehicles scheduled this week, and Nia has a field trip Thursday." "You know that's not what I meant." "I know." "Elijah." "Renata." She let out a breath that was somewhere between exasperation and love. "Call me tonight, after Nia's in bed." "I will. Promise me." "I promise." He hung up. He sat for a moment in the garage, listening to the ordinary sounds of it. The hiss of the compressor, a car passing on the street, Marcus eating lunch in the back room with the measured pace of someone trying to be unobtrusive. The flowers on the workbench caught the afternoon light. Outside on the sidewalk, one of the people with phones raised it and took a photograph of the garage facade. The hand-painted sign that had been there since Elijah's predecessor, an old Haitian mechanic named Gerald, had run the place 15 years ago and sold it when his hands gave out. Brooks Auto and Marine. The letters were still Gerald's, touched up twice by Elijah over the years. He'd never changed them because Gerald had taught him 3 things he'd never forgotten, and it seemed like the right way to keep saying thank you. He went back to the Buick. The drums needed attention, and Mrs. Galvez needed to pick up her car before 4, and 5 million views didn't change any of that. Or it changed everything around it, maybe. But the drums still needed attention. That was, in the end, the only answer Elijah had ever found reliable. When the world became large and loud and disorienting, you found the thing in front of you that needed doing, and you did it right. He picked up his tools. The Sterling Global offices occupied the top 4 floors of a glass tower downtown that had the specific architecture of institutions that wanted you to feel small before you reached the elevator. Elijah had been in buildings like this before, not often, and never for reasons that had made him comfortable. And he rode up in the elevator with his hands in the pockets of the sport coat he'd worn because Renata had once told him that a black man in a good sport coat was taken more seriously than the same man in a suit because the suit looked like he was trying, and trying communicated uncertainty. He didn't entirely agree with the theory, but he'd worn the coat. Dana Reyes met him in the lobby and walked him through a corridor of glass-walled conference rooms where, through the transparent walls, he could see meetings in progress, clusters of people around tables covered in documents and laptops, the interior weather of corporate decision-making visible but inaudible, like fish in a tank. The board is aware of the situation, Dana said, keeping her voice low and her pace professional. There's been significant media inquiry. Ms. Sterling wants to address the public response directly, which is part of why she asked you here. She glanced at him sideways. She also genuinely wants to hear what you said this morning about the bigger picture. I said it this morning. She wants her team to hear it. He nodded. They reached a conference room at the end of the corridor, larger than the others, with a view of the harbor. The eclipse was visible in the distance, a white shape among smaller shapes, sitting in its slip exactly where he'd left it. There were 7 people in the room when he entered. He recognized Victoria Sterling immediately, seated at the head of the table, dressed differently than this morning, the yacht casualness replaced by the full armor of corporate authority. 2 of the others he pegged as legal, from the specific way they held their pens. 2 were communications, from the way they were watching him. 1 was financial, from the spreadsheets visible on his laptop screen. The last one, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses pushed up on her head and the expression of someone who had been in this business long enough to have stopped being surprised by it, he couldn't immediately categorize. Mr. Brooks. Victoria gestured to the chair directly across from her. Thank you for coming in. He sat. He looked around the table. He had the sense, not quite paranoia, more like professional wariness, that the room had been arranged with a specific purpose, and that the purpose was not entirely the same as the stated purpose. But he had driven across town and ridden 11 floors in an elevator, and whatever was about to happen, he intended to handle it the same way he'd handled the engine room, by listening before he spoke, and by not touching anything he hadn't yet understood. I've asked my core team to join us, Victoria said. I want everyone in this room to hear what I'm about to say, and then I want everyone in this room to hear what I'd like to discuss with you. She looked around the table. Last night, I publicly embarrassed myself and my company by dismissing a qualified professional on the basis of how he looked when he walked onto my dock. He then proceeded to solve a problem in 43 minutes that 30 of our contracted specialists could not solve in 6 hours. She let that sit for a moment. I was wrong. I've told Mr. Brooks that. I'm telling all of you now. The room was quiet. Not the quiet of discomfort exactly, more the quiet of people recalibrating, adjusting the landscape of what they'd thought this meeting was. The woman with the reading glasses pushed up on her head was watching Elijah. He looked at her and she looked back at him with an expression that was, he thought, one of the more honest ones in the room. The video, said one of the communications people, a man in his late 30s with the careful neutrality of someone whose job required him to be as free of expressed opinion as possible, is at 11 million views as of 30 minutes ago. The comment section is, I don't need the metrics, Victoria said, not unkindly. I need the meaning. She turned to Elijah. You said this morning that what happened on that dock happens every day, to people who aren't being filmed. She paused. Tell me what you meant. Elijah looked at her. He looked around the table, at the legal team with their pens, the communications people in their careful blankness, the financial analyst with his spreadsheets, the woman whose category he hadn't solved yet. He thought about how to say it. He thought about Gerald, the Haitian mechanic who had sold him the garage and who, in 30 years of running it, had been passed over for every fleet contract in the city until a shipping company ran out of other options and discovered that Gerald was, simply, the best. He thought about his own father, a tool and die machinist of extraordinary skill who had spent a career being supervised by men with half his ability and twice his credentials. He thought about Marcus, 19 years old, who could diagnose a fuel system problem by ear and who was spending his days handing over sockets because no training program had ever looked at him and seen what Elijah saw. You have a hiring process, Elijah said, for your technical staff, your engineers, your maintenance contractors, your systems specialists. Yes, Victoria said. And in that process, there are gates, credentials, degrees from specific institutions, certifications that require you to have had access to specific training programs, professional affiliations that require you to have known someone who already had one. He leaned forward slightly. Every single one of those gates makes sense individually. Taken together, they create a system that is extremely good at finding people who grew up with access and extremely bad at finding people who didn't. He paused. The man who noticed the shaft coupling misalignment 8 months ago and wrote it in the maintenance log, what happened to his recommendation? A silence. It was flagged as low priority, Victoria said. By who? She looked at him steadily. By the systems coordinator. On my approval. And the systems coordinator has a degree from where? A longer silence. MIT, she said. Marine engineering. And he looked at a maintenance note written by a dock technician about a mechanical component, and he assessed it as low priority because, Elijah paused, because the dock technician wasn't the kind of person whose judgment he'd been trained to weight very heavily. The room was very quiet. That's speculative, said one of the legal people. It might be, Elijah said. He looked at the legal person without hostility. But I've been on a lot of docks. And I've read a lot of maintenance logs. And in my experience, the notes written by people without fancy credentials get treated like rough drafts, like placeholders, until something goes wrong. He looked back at Victoria. That misalignment was caught by someone who was paying attention, and it was ignored by someone who didn't think the person paying attention was worth listening to. And the result was 11 million views and 6 hours of system failure on a 180-foot yacht. He let a beat pass. I'm using your example because I was there, but the same thing happens every day in hospitals, in construction sites, in manufacturing plants, in every industry where people who work with their hands are treated as accessories to the people who work with their credentials. The woman with the reading glasses pushed up on her head said, quietly, "How long have you been a mechanic?" "Since I was 16, Elijah said. "My uncle had a shop." "Did you ever consider getting a degree? Marine engineering? Something in that line?" It wasn't a hostile question. She asked it the way someone asks a question they actually want the answer to. "I considered it," Elijah said, "when I was 19. Then my daughter's mother left and I had a 6-month-old and a rent payment, and the choice was real clear." He said it without bitterness. It was simply what had happened. "I learned everything I know from machines and from people who knew machines. Gerald Alcides taught me marine systems. A retired Navy machinist named Howard Webb taught me diagnostics. My uncle taught me to read a machine the way some people read a room. Feel what it's telling you, not just what it's showing you." He paused. "Those aren't credentials, but they're real." "They're real," Victoria said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." She looked around the table. Something was happening in her face. The kind of thing that doesn't happen in boardrooms very often, which was the visible process of an intelligent person actually changing their mind in real time, not performing the change, but doing it. "What do you need?" she said. It was the same question from this morning. But in this room, with these people, it meant something additional. Elijah had thought about it in the Buick's brake bay. He'd thought about it on the drive over. He had a clear answer, but he wanted to say it right. Because the way you said something in a room like this determined whether it landed as an accusation or an idea, and he wanted it to land as an idea. "A door," he said. "That's all. Not charity, not lowered standards. A door." He looked at Victoria. "You have 30 engineers who flew in last night and couldn't find a misalignment that's been in the maintenance log for 8 months. I'm not criticizing them. They're good at what they do. But there are people out there who are better at certain things, and they have no path into this industry because they don't have the right piece of paper. Create a path. An apprenticeship. Real training, real wages, real possibility of advancement. Find the people who are standing outside the gate because nobody handed them a key. Give them the key." He stopped. "That's what I need." The room held the silence for a moment. Then Dana Reyes, who had been standing near the door this whole time in the professional invisibility of the very competent, wrote something on her tablet. Victoria looked at her legal team, at her communications people, at the financial analyst who had stopped looking at his spreadsheets and was watching Elijah. Then she looked at the woman with the reading glasses pushed up on her head. "Patricia," she said. "I heard every word of it," the woman, Patricia, said. Her voice had the quality of someone who had been in enough rooms to know when something real just happened in one. "I'll have a framework by end of week." Elijah looked at Patricia with fresh attention. He revised his category assessment. She wasn't financial, she was the one who actually made things. Victoria turned back to Elijah. "I want to say something publicly about last night, about what you just said, with your permission." "You don't need my permission to say you were wrong." "No. But I need your permission to say your name." He was quiet for a moment. He thought about the flowers on the workbench, the yellow legal pad with the television producer's numbers, the man in Birmingham who'd watched the clip 4 times. "Say whatever you need to say," Elijah told her. "Just make sure the apprenticeship program is real before you announce it. Because if you say it, and then it disappears in 6 weeks, it does more damage than if you'd said nothing." Victoria nodded. "Once clean. Understood. And hire Patricia to run it," he said. "Not a communications person, not a legal person. Patricia." Patricia made a sound that might have been a laugh. "I don't run programs. I design them." "Design it and oversee it," Elijah said. He looked at her steadily. "Things that get handed off after they're designed tend to lose their shape." Patricia looked at him for a moment. Then she pushed her reading glasses down from the top of her head onto her nose. "Fair enough," she said. He was back at the garage by 3:15, which was exactly when he needed to be, because Nia's school was 8 blocks away, and she got out at 3:30, and the arrangement was that he either picked her up or Marcus did, depending on the day, and today was an Elijah day. The crowd outside the garage had grown during the afternoon. Not dramatically. This wasn't a protest or a gathering, just the organic accumulation of people drawn by something they'd seen on a screen and now wanted to see in real life. There were perhaps 20 of them, a varied assortment of ages and faces, some of them with cameras, some of them just standing. A few had handwritten signs, which Elijah found both touching and slightly alarming. One of them read, "Real ones recognize real ones." Another, "Brooks Auto, legend status." A third, held by a woman who looked to be in her 80s and was wearing a church hat despite the secular occasion. "We see you, baby." He drove past them to get to the school, and several of them waved. He waved back, a single lift of his left hand from the steering wheel, because they were people, and they had come out and that deserved something. Nia was waiting on the school steps with her backpack and her lunchbox and her blue sweater, talking to her friend Keisha in the animated way of 4th graders, who have not seen each other in 6 hours, despite sitting in the same room. She spotted his truck and said something to Keisha that made Keisha look up too, and Keisha's expression was the specific expression of a child who knows something important and is absolutely delighted about it. Nia came down the steps at a controlled run, the walk that is almost running that children do when they want to appear calm, and pulled open the passenger door and climbed in. "Keisha said you're famous," she announced. "I fixed a boat," Elijah said. "Keisha said it has 11 million views. People watch a lot of things." Nia buckled her seatbelt and looked at him with the level gravity she'd been cultivating since she was about 4. She had a seriousness to her that sometimes made him feel he was talking to someone much older, not in an unsettling way, but in the way that made him think she was processing the world at a rate that would eventually produce something remarkable if he could just keep her fed and housed and loved long enough to let it happen. "Are you okay, Dad?" He pulled away from the curb. "I'm okay." "For real?" "For real." She looked at him for another moment. Then she pulled her library book out of her backpack and opened it on her knee and began reading, which was her version of accepting an answer. She trusted him, and she was demonstrating that trust by letting the conversation close. He loved her so completely in that moment that it had no useful expression, so he just drove. They stopped at the grocery store on the way home. They needed milk, eggs, the specific crackers, and bread. Nia pushed the cart with the focused authority she always brought to the grocery store, navigating the aisles with purpose and occasionally consulting the mental list she maintained. She had memorized over the years exactly what the household needed and in what quantities, a habit she'd developed around age 7 without being asked. In the cereal aisle, a man Elijah didn't know stopped walking and looked at him, then at his phone, then back at him. "You're him," the man said. Elijah picked up a box of oatmeal. "Probably." "My son watched that video like 6 times this morning." The man, middle-aged, work clothes, the specific tiredness of someone at the end of a long shift, had an expression that was harder to look at than the admiration usually was, because it was more complicated than admiration. "He's 19. He's been trying to get into an apprenticeship program for electrical work for 2 years. Got turned down twice. He's good. He's really good. But he didn't finish the certification because we couldn't." He stopped. Started over. He watched you walk up that ramp and he called me and said, "Dad, watch this," and we watched it together on the phone. Elijah set the oatmeal in the cart. He looked at the man. "What's his name?" "Deshaun." "He's got a phone?" The man nodded, not quite understanding yet. "Give me your number," Elijah said. "Write it on something." The man blinked. He pulled out his wallet, found a receipt, and wrote his number on the back of it. He handed it to Elijah with the careful deliberateness of someone who has done something they're not entirely sure they believe yet. "Tell Deshaun to be available Thursday morning," Elijah said. "I might have something." The man looked at him. Something moved across his face that Elijah recognized because he'd felt it himself. In the garage. The night Gerald told him the place was his if he wanted it. The specific vertigo of a door opening where you'd stopped expecting one. "Thank you," the man said. "Don't thank me yet. It might not be anything." Elijah folded the receipt and put it in his jacket pocket. "But it might be something." He pushed the cart forward. Nia, who had been reading the back of a granola box with apparent deep interest during the entire exchange, fell into step beside him. "Who was that?" she said. "Someone's dad," Elijah said. She considered this. "Like you." "Yeah," he said. "Like me." They finished the shopping. They went home. Nia did her homework at the kitchen table while Elijah made dinner, a chicken and rice situation that he'd been making since she was 3, adjusted over the years for her evolving opinions on the ratio of garlic to everything else. She ate with appetite, talked about the Natural History Museum field trip, informed him that her teacher misses. Okafor had said the dinosaur exhibit was the best part, but Keisha's cousin, who was in 7th grade, said the human body section was better, and that she herself intended to evaluate both with an open mind. He listened to all of it. After dinner, Nia washed the dishes, her assigned task, executed with competent, if not immaculate, results, and then settled on the couch to read, and Elijah sat at the kitchen table and looked at his phone. The missed calls were in the hundreds now. The text messages had organized themselves, in some organic way, into rough categories. Media people, professional contacts, strangers who had found his number through means he didn't want to examine too closely, and people he actually knew. He responded to the people he actually knew. Gerald, who had sent a 3-word text that said, "Only always knew son," in all capital letters, which was the most Gerald response imaginable. A few former clients, 2 old friends. His cousin in Memphis, who sent a voice note that was 45 seconds of pure celebration that Elijah listened to twice. He called Renata. "Are you watching the news?" she said instead of hello. "No." "Turn it on." "Renata, I don't have the—" "Elijah, turn it on." He went to the living room, told Nia to scoot, and turned on the television. He found a news channel and watched for 30 seconds before he understood what Renata had wanted him to see. Victoria Sterling was giving a press statement. Live from what appeared to be the Harbor View Marina, the eclipse visible behind her, the harbor gold in the late afternoon light. She was standing at a cluster of microphones with the particular poise of someone who has decided what they're going to say and intends to say it completely. He turned up the volume. "And I want to be unambiguous about something," Victoria was saying. "What I said and how I behaved last night was wrong, not because it became public, not because of the cameras, because it was simply wrong to look at a qualified professional and dismiss him before he spoke a word. Elijah Brooks is more skilled than most of the people I pay enormous amounts of money to manage technical problems. He walked onto my yacht, read the maintenance log, and solved in 43 minutes a problem that had been escalating for 8 months. I was wrong about him. I was wrong in the way I expressed that wrongness. And I want to say something else." She paused. Not for effect, more like she was making sure she had the right words. "He told me this morning that what happened to him on that dock happens every day. To people who are qualified, competent, even exceptional, and who are dismissed before they're given the chance to demonstrate it. I believe him. And starting next month, Sterling Global will be launching a formal apprenticeship initiative in marine engineering, mechanical systems, and technical trades, with full wages and a defined pathway to permanent employment. No degree requirement, no prerequisite credentials, a fair evaluation of skill and commitment. Because talent doesn't always come with the right paperwork. And we've been losing too much of it for too long." Elijah sat on the couch next to Nia, who had put down her book and was watching the television with her knees pulled up to her chest. "Is that the lady from the boat?" Nia said. "Yes." "She seems different than how Keisha's mom described her." People can be different than how they first seem. Nia thought about this with the seriousness she brought to most things. "Do you think she means it?" Elijah thought about the meeting in the conference room, about Patricia pushing her glasses down, about the way Victoria had said understood, not as a social gesture, but as a commitment. "I think she means it today," he said. "And I think she knows that today's not enough." Nia nodded slowly, as though this were a satisfying and accurate answer. On the television, Victoria was taking questions. Reporters were calling out from the crowd, overlapping, and she was handling them with the patience of someone who'd decided they were not the point of this particular moment. Elijah muted the television. He sat there for a while with his daughter, the kitchen smelling of garlic and chicken, the evening dark and quiet outside, the city going about its enormous and mostly invisible life on the other side of the window. He thought about Deshawn and the receipt in his pocket. He thought about Marcus, who had hovered with restrained anxiety all day and who deserved a real conversation tomorrow. He thought about Patricia, who would have a framework by end of week, and about whether the framework would survive contact with the institutional resistance that greeted every real change in every large organization, and about what he could do to make sure it did. He thought about Gerald and Howard Webb and his uncle's shop, and the specific education of people who had taught him not with classrooms but with engines and patience and the insistence that there was always a reason, you just had to find it. He thought about 0.31 millimeters. He thought about how long small things could grow in the dark before they shut everything down. "Hey," Nia said. He looked at her. "The permission slip," she said, "for the field trip. Did you sign it?" He had. He had signed it at 7:53 in the morning, standing at the kitchen counter in between pouring coffee and reading 47 missed calls, because the permission slip was the thing that needed doing, and so he had done it. "In your backpack," he said. She checked, found it, held it up like a small flag. "Okay," she said, satisfied, and went back to her book. He sat in the quiet for another few minutes. Then he got up, went to the kitchen, and started making tomorrow's lunch. There was bread and turkey and the specific crackers she liked, and apple slices. If he cut them tonight, they'd brown by morning, so he'd do them fresh. He moved through the kitchen with the same attention he brought to everything. Not performing competence, just exercising it, because the alternative was doing it wrong, and he didn't see the point of that. His phone buzzed on the counter, a text from an unknown number. He almost ignored it. Then he read it. "My name is Jordan Webb. You knew my grandfather Howard. He passed 3 years ago. I've been trying to break into marine mechanical work for 4 years. Every door closed. I saw the video today. I don't know if you remember him, but he used to say you were the best student he ever had. If there's any way, anything at all, I'm sorry to bother you." Elijah stood at the kitchen counter. The kitchen was warm. Nia was reading on the couch. The bread was on the cutting board. He typed back, "I remember Howard. He was the best teacher I ever had. Call me tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock. He set the phone down. He made the sandwich. Outside, the city was doing what cities do at night, running, breathing, accumulating its million small dramas and ordinary moments, all of them happening simultaneously, most of them invisible to most of the people living through them. Somewhere in it, a 19-year-old named Deshawn and a young man named Jordan Webb and Marcus in his apartment and the woman in the church hat with her handwritten sign, and the man in Birmingham who'd watched the video 4 times, were all part of the same thing, even though they didn't know each other and might never meet. Elijah knew it. He wasn't sure yet what to do with knowing it, but he was starting to see the shape of it. The way you see a problem in an engine before you understand the solution, the outline of it first, then the specifics, then the clear and simple truth that was always there, waiting for someone to stop looking at the symptoms long enough to find it. He put the sandwich in the container. He closed the lid. He turned off the kitchen light and went to tell his daughter it was time for bed. Jordan Webb called at exactly 8 o'clock. Elijah was on his second cup of coffee, standing at the kitchen window watching the street below while Nia ate breakfast with the focused efficiency of a child who had remembered, on her own, that Thursday was field trip day and had therefore set her alarm 6 minutes earlier than usual. The morning was gray and cold. the kind of November morning that didn't make promises about later, and the sidewalk in front of the garage was empty except for 2 pigeons and a paper cup rolling in the wind. The crowd from yesterday had dispersed overnight, which Elijah was grateful for in the specific way you're grateful for the return of ordinary things. He answered on the second ring. "Mr. Brooks." The voice was young, early 20s, and had the careful diction of someone who had rehearsed this call and was now navigating the gap between the rehearsal and the reality. "This is Jordan Webb. You texted me last night. I want to say I wasn't expecting you to actually respond, and I appreciate—" "How long were you with your grandfather?" Elijah said. A pause. "Every summer from when I was 8 until he passed. He had a shop in Gloucester. I used to hand him tools." "What kind of tools?" "Sir? What kind of tools did you hand him, specifically?" A longer pause. Elijah heard something shift in it, the young man recalibrating, understanding that this was not a social question. Socket sets mostly, 3/8 drive for the tight spaces. He liked the Craftsman flex head ratchet for the prop shaft work, and he always asked for the torque wrench before I thought he needed it, which I didn't understand until later. "Why later?" "Because later I understood he was setting torque before the final assembly, not at it. He was working ahead." A beat. "He said a good mechanic is always 3 steps ahead of the problem." Elijah drank his coffee. "What happened with the 4 years?" Jordan's exhale was quiet but audible. "First apprenticeship program. Turned down because I didn't have the associate's degree they technically required as a co-requisite. Second, I got to the final round and then they went with someone who'd done 2 years at a maritime academy. Third, I got the position and then the company lost a contract and the whole apprenticeship cohort got cut before we started. Fourth," he stopped. "I stopped counting after 4. "How old are you?" 23. "Where are you working now?" "Dock loading at Pier 12. I've been there 11 months. Elijah set his cup down. He looked out the window at the 2 pigeons, who had found something on the sidewalk and were debating it with the gravity of creatures for whom every decision is existential. "You know Patricia Osei?" he said. "No, sir." "You will. I'm going to give you a number. You're going to call it today before noon, and you're going to tell Patricia that Elijah Brooks said to call. She's going to ask you 2 questions. The first is what you know. The second is what you're willing to learn. Don't dress either answer up. Just answer straight." A silence that had a specific quality. The silence of someone writing something down. "Yes, sir." "And Jordan," he paused, "your grandfather was the best diagnostics teacher I ever had. He used to say the machine doesn't lie, only the mechanic lies. If you learned anything from him, you already have more than most people start with." Jordan Webb said quietly, "He talked about you sometimes. He said you had the listening ear." "He gave me the listening ear," Elijah said. "Call Patricia before noon." He hung up. Nia was watching him from the table over the rim of her orange juice glass. "Grandpa Howard," she said. "You remember him?" "You told me about him. The one who could hear what was wrong with an engine without opening the hood." "That's right." "Was that his grandson?" "Yeah." She considered this, turning her juice glass in both hands the way she did when she was thinking carefully about something. "Is he going to be okay?" Elijah looked at his daughter. She asked the question with the directness of someone who had learned by living with him that the purpose of a question was to get an actual answer, not a reassurance. "I think so," Elijah said. "If he's half what his grandfather was, he'll be more than okay." Nia nodded once, satisfied, and finished her orange juice. The meeting he hadn't anticipated came 2 days later. It arrived in the form of a phone call from Dana Reyes, which had become, in the short span of 4 days, a recognizable fixture of his daily landscape. Dana's calls were efficient and precisely timed, which he respected, and they never ran longer than they needed to, which he respected more. "Miss Sterling would like to meet with you again," Dana said. "Not at the office. Somewhere more—" she used the word neutral. "She can come to the garage," Elijah said. A brief pause. "I'll let her know." Victoria Sterling arrived at the garage at 2 o'clock on a Friday afternoon in a car that was deliberately unremarkable, a black sedan, no driver, no entourage. She was dressed down from the boardroom, dark jeans, a wool coat, hair loose. She parked in the small lot beside the garage and walked in through the open bay door the way a person walks into a place when they've decided not to be intimidated by it. Marcus saw her first. His reaction was visible even from the back of the bay, where Elijah was elbow-deep in a transmission on a 2011 Tacoma. A full-body startle, rapidly contained into professional composure, followed by the specific frozen quality of someone uncertain whether to say something. "Tell her I'll be 5 minutes," Elijah said, without looking up. Marcus delivered this message. Victoria received it by Elijah's peripheral vision, with a single nod. She did not take out her phone. She looked around the garage instead, at the tools on their pegboard hooks, at the hydraulic lift, at the framed photograph of Gerald that hung beside the landline, at the hand-painted Brooks Auto and Marine sign visible through the window. She looked at all of it the way she'd looked at the engine room on the Eclipse, like she was trying to read something. He finished the transmission work, wiped his hands, and came to where she was standing. "Thank you for coming to me," he said. "I thought it was right," she said simply. He gestured toward the back of the garage where there was a small office space. 2 chairs, a desk covered in work orders, a coffee maker that was not decorative. She followed him without commentary on the surroundings. He poured 2 cups of coffee. He set hers on the desk and sat in the chair across from her. She wrapped both hands around the mug and looked at him with the directness that had become, over their short acquaintance, the thing he found most genuinely creditable about her. Whatever else she was, she looked at things straight. "The apprenticeship framework," she said. "Patricia finished the first draft. I want your opinion on it." She slid a document across the desk. 12 pages, dense with structure. Eligibility criteria, evaluation metrics, wage scales, advancement pathways, mentorship protocols. He read it the way he read maintenance logs, from beginning to end, every line, nothing skipped. She waited. She was good at waiting, he'd noticed. Better than most people with her level of authority, who tended to experience silence as something that needed filling. He finished reading. He set the document down. "The evaluation criteria," he said. Page 4. It says candidates will be assessed on technical aptitude and professional communications. Yes. Define professional communications. She looked at the page. "I'd assume written and verbal clarity. The ability to sound like someone who went to the right schools," Elijah said. Not harshly, as a fact. She was quiet for a moment, then, "Explain. There are people who know everything about how a system works and can't write a report that reads the way your communications team expects a report to read. That's not a technical failure, that's a cultural one. If professional communications is an evaluation criterion without a clear definition and without coaching resources to bridge the gap, it becomes the same gate you already have, just with a different name on it." He tapped the document. "Either define it narrowly, can they communicate what they found and what they did, or take it off the evaluation criteria and put it in the training curriculum instead. Teach it. Don't gatekeep with it." Victoria looked at the document. She turned to page 4. She took a pen from her coat pocket and made a note in the margin with the efficiency of someone who had been making margin notes since she was old enough to read. "What else?" she said. Page 7. The mentorship protocol says candidates will be paired with a senior engineer from Sterling's existing staff. That's correct. Has anyone asked the senior engineers if they want to do this? She looked up. It would be part of their role. Mentorship is not the same as supervision. You can require supervision. Mentorship has to be willing. If you pair a candidate with an engineer who resents the program or resents the candidate, you're not giving them a mentor. You're giving them an obstacle with a title. He paused. Find out who in your organization actually believes in this thing. Start with those people. Build from there. She made another margin note. She looked at him across the desk with an expression that had nothing performative in it. "You've thought about this more than I have. I've been on the receiving end of it longer than you have." She accepted that without deflection. "Fair." Page 11, Elijah said. The advancement pathway. After 18 months of apprenticeship, candidates are eligible for entry-level positions in the relevant technical division. Yes. Entry-level. That's the standard pathway for, if someone completes 18 months of supervised evaluated apprenticeship and demonstrates competency in the role, they are not entry-level. They have 18 months of documented experience. Call it what it is. He looked at her steadily. One of the ways these programs fail is that they bring people in through the side door and then make them start at the bottom of a ladder that the front door candidates get to start halfway up. That's not opportunity. That's a longer version of the same obstacle. A longer silence. That will have pushback internally, she said, from the senior staff. I know, Elijah said. Do it anyway. She looked at him for a moment. Then she wrote in the margin again, longer this time, 3 or 4 lines. You're harder on this than I expected, she said. Not as a complaint, as an observation. You asked me what I needed, Elijah said. I need it to be real. A program that looks right from the outside and fails from the inside does more damage than no program, because it becomes evidence that the system tried and the people failed. And that's backwards. Victoria set her pen down. She held her coffee mug with both hands again and looked at the document on the desk between them. Then she looked at him. Can I ask you something personal? She said. You can ask. When you came up that gangway, after everything I said, why didn't you leave? He thought about it. It wasn't a new question. He'd turned it over himself, in the garage that first morning, in the quiet between other things. But he hadn't put it into words for anyone yet, because the job needed doing, he said. That's not the whole answer. No, he agreed. It's not. He turned his coffee cup in his hands, the same motion Naya made with her juice glass, which he'd never noticed before now. The whole answer is that leaving would have made her right. Not about whether I could fix the boat. About whether I belonged there. And she wasn't right about that. He looked at Victoria directly. I've spent my whole career walking into rooms where someone had already decided I didn't belong. I decided a long time ago that I wasn't going to help them be right. Victoria held his gaze. When did you decide that? I was 22. I went to interview for a maintenance contract at a shipping company. The man doing the interview looked at my application and asked me if I had a criminal record. He said it the way he said most things, level, without theater, the fact delivered straight. I didn't. I had 3 years of documented work and 2 certifications and a reference letter from Gerald. He hadn't read any of it. He asked about a criminal record first. He paused. I answered the question. I showed him the reference letter. I got the contract. But on the way home, I made a decision that I was going to be so good at what I do that the question would eventually become embarrassing. Not impossible. It'd still be asked, but embarrassing. The garage was quiet around them. Somewhere in the bay, Marcus was doing something with a pneumatic wrench. A brief burst of sound, then silence. Did it work? Victoria said. Somewhat, Elijah said. People still make their assessments before they look at the work. But sometimes, not always, not even most of the time, but sometimes, the work is clear enough that the assessment has to change in public. And when it changes in public, it matters more than when it changes in private, because other people see it. Victoria was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice had a quality it hadn't had in the boardroom, something that lived under the authority, less carefully managed. I've been running companies for 18 years, she said. I've made hiring decisions, partnership decisions, investment decisions, thousands of them. And I've genuinely believed, that I was meritocratic, that I looked at capability. She paused. You are the first person who has ever made me actually examine whether that was true. What do you think? Elijah said. She looked at the document on the desk, at her margin notes, at the 12 pages of structure that she and Patricia had built in the 4 days since he'd sat across the table and said the word door. I think I've been meritocratic within a pool that was already filtered, she said. I found the best people available to me. I just never asked why certain people weren't available. That's honest, Elijah said. It's late, she said. But it's honest. Late is better than never. He picked up the document and handed it back to her. Fix pages 4, 7, and 11. Have Patricia call me when the second draft is ready. She took the document. She stood. She looked around the small office, the work orders on the desk, the coffee maker, the single window that looked out on the bay where the Tacoma sat waiting. How long have you had this place? She said. 11 years? Before that? I worked for other people. What made you buy it? He thought about Gerald's hands giving out, and the conversation they'd had sitting on overturned buckets in this exact bay, and the number Gerald had asked for, which was both more than Elijah had and less than the place was worth, because Gerald had known both things and made his decision accordingly. "Someone offered me a chance," he said, "and I took it." Victoria nodded slowly. She buttoned her coat. She picked up her coffee mug and brought it to the small sink in the corner of the office and rinsed it, which surprised him. Not because it was an extraordinary act, but because it was such an ordinary one, and he hadn't expected it from her. "I'll have Patricia call you," she said. She walked out through the bay. Marcus watched her go with the expression of a person living through something he would describe to his friends for several years. She got in the unremarkable black sedan and pulled out of the small lot and drove away. Marcus appeared in the office doorway. "Was that—" "Yes," Elijah said. "Did she just rinse her own coffee mug?" "She did." Marcus absorbed this. "Huh," he said, with the philosophical density of a single syllable carrying several thoughts. Then he went back to the Tacoma. The public response, which had been building in the background like a tide, reached Elijah's shore in a different way than he'd expected. He had anticipated, based on what he'd seen of how the internet processed things, that the attention would peak and recede, the way most things did, the clip joining the vast archive of moments that had mattered briefly and then became wallpaper. And some of it did recede. The television producers stopped calling after he didn't return their calls. The crowd outside the garage dwindled to nothing by the end of the first week. The flowers on the workbench went in the trash when they passed their reasonable life. But something else happened in place of the receding attention. Something slower and more particular. Letters came. Not emails, actual letters, handwritten or typed, sent to the garage address, which was publicly available. He didn't know how the volume built the way it did, only that by the end of the second week, there were enough of them that Marcus had started keeping them in a box under the front counter, sorted roughly by date received. Elijah read every one. There was a letter from a woman in Detroit who was a diesel mechanic with 22 years of experience and had never once been offered a lead position because, as her supervisor had told her 4 years ago with remarkable frankness, clients weren't comfortable with a woman doing that level of work. And the company had to think about client comfort. There was a letter from a man in rural Tennessee who had been repairing agricultural equipment since he was 14 and had applied to 17 apprenticeship programs in 12 years without once receiving a response. There was a letter from a 17-year-old in South Carolina who said only that she wanted to work with machines and didn't know if people like her were allowed to and wanted to know how he'd known it was okay to walk up the gangway. That last one he read 3 times. He wrote back to it. He wasn't a natural letter writer. His instinct was always toward the direct and the spare, but he wrote the 17-year-old in South Carolina 2 paragraphs. The first said that he had not known it was okay when he walked up the gangway, only that it was necessary. The second said that necessary and okay were not the same thing, and that sometimes you had to move on the first while you waited for the second to catch up. He wasn't sure it was the right thing to say, but it was the true thing, and he'd learned, over the long course of his life, that the true thing was usually closer to useful than the comfortable thing. He sent the letter. Then he went back to work. The conversation with Victoria that he hadn't planned for came on a Wednesday morning, 3 weeks after the dock. He was at the marina, not the Eclipse, but the working side of Harborview, where the fleet maintenance contract he'd held for 6 years required him to be every other Wednesday. He was inspecting a 30-foot pilot boat, running through the pre-winter checklist with the systematic patience the job required, when he heard footsteps on the dock that had the specific rhythm of someone who knew where they were going. He looked up. Victoria Sterling was walking toward him alone. No Dana Reyes, no legal team, no entourage. She was in the wool coat again, her hair catching the harbor wind, and she had her hands in her pockets and an expression he hadn't seen on her before, which was the expression of someone who has been thinking about something for a long time and has finally decided to say it out loud. He straightened up from the pilot boat's engine compartment. "I didn't know you'd be here," she said. "Fleet contract, every other Wednesday." She nodded. She looked at the pilot boat. "Can I walk with you? While you work?" He looked at her for a moment. Then he picked up his inspection checklist and gestured along the dock. "Walk." They moved along the pier side by side, Elijah checking fittings and running the items on the list while Victoria matched his pace. She was quiet for a bit. He let the quiet stand, working through the inspection, making notes, testing connections with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this particular task hundreds of times. "I've been thinking about what you said," she said eventually, "about walking into rooms where someone had decided you didn't belong." He made a note on the checklist. "And?" "I've been trying to figure out when I first started doing that, deciding before looking." She paused. "I think it was very early. I think I learned it before I had the language for what I was learning. I grew up around a particular kind of success, my father's world, and there were certain things that success looked like, certain signals. You develop an eye for the signals, and you stop seeing what's behind them." "Most people do," Elijah said. "Most people aren't running companies," she said. "Most people aren't making decisions that determine who gets opportunity and who doesn't." He stopped at the next boat on the list. A harbor tender, older, with a diesel that needed attention. He opened the engine compartment and began the inspection, hands moving through the check with the same automatic competence that had carried him through 40 years of mechanical work. "My father was a mechanic," he said, without preamble, without segue, just saying it, the way you say something when the moment and the person make it possible. "A machinist, technically. Tool and die. He worked at the same plant for 31 years. He was, by any objective measure, one of the best people in that plant at what he did. He trained 18 people over his career, men who came after him, learned from him, moved up. He ran his hand along the fuel line, checking for wear. He retired at the same classification level he started at, not because he wasn't capable of more, because the path forward always had a requirement he didn't quite have, or a recommendation he couldn't quite get, or a committee that decided someone else was the better fit." He paused. "He never complained about it. He was not a complaining man. But I watched it. I watched it my whole childhood, and I decided, when I was old enough to decide things, that I was going to do everything in my power to make sure the work was undeniable, because I watched how hard it is to be denied when you're undeniable." He closed the engine compartment. He made the notation on the checklist. Victoria was standing 2 feet away, listening with the complete stillness of someone doing nothing else. No phone, no internal agenda, nothing divided. Just listening. "Is that why you read the maintenance log first?" she said. He looked at her. "What?" "When you came on board. Everyone else went straight to the systems. You read the maintenance log." She paused. "Is that why? Because you were looking for the person who got overlooked?" He considered that. He hadn't framed it that way in his own mind, but as she said it, he turned it over and found it was not inaccurate. "I was looking for the beginning," he said. "The maintenance log is the beginning. Everything in an engine has a history. It didn't fail suddenly. It failed in sequence, and the sequence started somewhere. I wanted the start." He moved to the next boat. "But yes, part of it is that I've learned that the beginning is often in something someone wrote down and no one read." They walked. The harbor moved around them, gray and cold and working. Tugboats and small ferries and dock workers in high-vis jackets. The ordinary machinery of a working waterfront doing the things it had always done. "I want to ask you something," Victoria said, "and I want you to tell me if it's not something you want to discuss." "Ask." "Your daughter's mother, you've never mentioned her except to say she left. You don't have to talk about it, but I'm asking because you've raised a child entirely alone for 10 years while building a business, while doing work that required you to be excellent when the world was treating you like you were irrelevant. And I'm trying to understand how a person does that." Elijah kept walking. He thought about Diane, which was something he did regularly but did not do casually. Her name still had weight, still had shape. The way the name of someone you'd loved and lost always retained its specific gravity, regardless of the years that accumulated after. "She left when Naya was 6 months old," he said. "She had her reasons. They were her reasons and not mine to analyze." He paused. "I was 29, I had a 6-month-old, I had the garage that I'd been running for 8 months, and I had approximately nobody who could help me with both at the same time." He moved to the next item on the checklist. "So I figured out how to do both at the same time." "How?" "By doing it," he said simply. "There isn't a secret. People want there to be a secret, some system or philosophy. There isn't one. You love the child, you do the work, you sleep when you can, and you get up the next day and do it again." He looked at her sideways. The only thing I'd say is that I stopped thinking of those two things as competing, the garage and Nia. I stopped treating it like one took from the other. They're both just my life. Both of them, all of it, together. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice had the quality it had had in the small office at the garage, under the authority. "I have a son," she said. "He's 14. He's at a school in Connecticut that costs more per year than your garage probably makes." She said it without apology, just naming the fact. "I see him every other weekend when my schedule permits, which it doesn't always permit." She paused. "I have justified this to myself in every way available, that the work matters, that I'm building something, that he has every material advantage, that I'm modeling ambition and capability." She paused again, longer. "I watched you leave that dock the night you fixed my yacht. You had 47 missed calls and a contract bonus and 11 million people watching you, and you went home to make sure your daughter had lunch in her bag the next morning." Her voice was entirely steady. "I've been thinking about that for 3 weeks." They had reached the end of the pier. The harbor opened up ahead of them, wide and gray and indifferent to everything they'd said. A seagull crossed in front of them and banked south toward the open water. Elijah finished the last notation on his checklist. He closed the clipboard. "You still have time," he said. "To what?" "To change it. If you want to change it, you still have time." He looked out at the water. "I'm not saying stop working. I'm saying stop treating presence like a sacrifice. Show up, not for performances. For the ordinary things, that's what they remember." She was quiet beside him. "How do you know what they remember?" she said. "You're raising her. You won't know for years what she took from it." "I don't know for certain," Elijah admitted, "but I know what I remember from my father." "Not the achievements? Not the certifications on the wall? I remember that he was at every one of my baseball games. I remember that he sat at the kitchen table and helped me with math, even when he was tired from the plant. I remember that he never, not once, made me feel like I was interrupting something more important." He paused. "He's been gone for 4 years, and I can still hear exactly how he laughed. That's what stays." Victoria didn't respond for a moment. When she did, it was just one word, said quietly, to herself as much as to him. "Okay," she said. They stood at the end of the pier for a minute in silence that was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that settles between people who have said real things and don't need to ornament them. Then Elijah picked up his toolbox. "I have 3 more vessels on the list," he said. "Of course." She straightened. The authority came back. Not performatively, just naturally, the way it settled on her whenever she refocused. "Patricia has the second draft ready. She wants to schedule a call with you this week. Friday works. After 4. I'll tell her." She paused. "Elijah?" It was the first time she'd used his first name. He noticed it without reacting to it. "What you said about the 17-year-old from South Carolina, did you actually write back to her?" He looked at her. "How do you know about that?" "Dana follows everything." He shook his head, not unkindly. "Yes, I wrote back." "What did you say?" He told her. The 2 paragraphs, the distinction between necessary and okay, the honest uncertainty about whether it was the right thing. Victoria looked at him for a long moment. "It was the right thing," she said. "Necessary and okay are not the same thing. You should write that down." "I did write it down," Elijah said. "I mailed it to South Carolina." Something moved across her face. Quick, warm, gone. "Fair enough." She turned to walk back up the pier. Then she stopped and turned back. "The apprenticeship announcement. We're scheduling a press event for next week. Patricia is insisting that you be there." "I'm not a press event kind of person." "Patricia anticipated you'd say that. She said to tell you that Jordan Webb and Deshaun Garrett will both be there, and they asked specifically if you would be." He was quiet. Jordan Webb, Howard's grandson, who had spent 4 years standing at closed doors. Deshaun Garrett, the 19-year-old from the grocery store who had called on Thursday morning as promised and talked to Patricia for 45 minutes about fuel systems and electrical diagnostics in a conversation that Patricia had described to Elijah as, quote, like watching someone play an instrument they didn't know they could play. "What time?" Elijah said. 11 o'clock Tuesday morning. He looked at his clipboard. He looked at the harbor. He thought about his father at 31 years in the same classification, and Gerald's hands giving out, and Howard Webb with his listening ear, and all the maintenance logs that nobody read. "I'll be there," he said, "but I'm driving my truck." The corners of Victoria's mouth moved. "Nobody asked you not to." She walked back up the pier. He watched her go for a moment. The wool coat, the harbor wind, the particular way she carried herself that was, he thought, beginning to look slightly different than it had 3 weeks ago. Not diminished, adjusted, like a coupling that had been running misaligned for a long time and had finally been brought back into true. He turned back to the harbor tender. He had work to do. The diesel needed attention, and the cold was coming in off the water. And somewhere across the city, a 17-year-old in South Carolina was probably going to read 2 paragraphs about necessary and okay. And Naya had a field trip report due on Friday that she'd been working on in secret because she wanted to surprise him with the grade. And Marcus needed a real conversation about his future that Elijah had been building toward for 3 weeks. He picked up his wrench. He got to work. The harbor moved around him, gray and alive, full of the particular kind of truth that machines and water share. They don't perform, they don't pretend, they simply are what they are, and they will tell you everything if you take the time to listen. Elijah listened. He always had. The press event was held on a Tuesday morning at Harbor View Marina, which Elijah suspected was Victoria's way of closing a circle. The same dock, the same gray November water, the same white shape of the eclipse in its slip behind the cluster of microphones and cameras and carefully arranged chairs. Different weather. The morning was sharper, cleaner, a winter sun cutting low across the harbor. And a different crowd. No engineers with laptops. No late-night crisis energy. Just press and city officials who had heard about the apprenticeship initiative and wanted to be photographed adjacent to it, and a small group of people who had been invited personally and were standing slightly apart from the official machinery of the event, with the careful stillness of people who were not yet certain they belonged in a place like this. Elijah parked his truck in the same spot as the first night. He sat in it for a moment before getting out. He could see Jordan Webb from here, 23 years old, tall, in a jacket that looked new, standing with his hands in his pockets and his eyes moving over the marina with the specific attention of someone who worked on a dock and was reading this one professionally. Next to him, shorter and broader-shouldered, was Deshaun Garrett, who had his phone in his hand and appeared to be taking photographs of the eclipse with the focused interest of someone cataloging something important. A third young man stood slightly behind them, someone Elijah hadn't met yet, introduced to him only through Patricia's notes as Caleb Torres, 21, from the Eastport side of the waterfront, who had been doing engine work on fishing boats since he was 15 and had been trying for 3 years to formalize what he already knew. 3 people. Out of, Patricia had told him, 212 who had already pre-registered interest in the apprenticeship program in the 9 days since Victoria's announcement. 212. He'd sat with that number for a while when Patricia told him. Let it settle through him the way certain facts did. Not quickly, not on the surface, but slowly, into the deeper places where things became real rather than abstract. 212 people who had been standing at a version of that gangway, toolbox in hand, waiting for someone to stop laughing long enough to ask what they could do. He got out of the truck. Jordan saw him first. Something in the young man's posture changed. Not nervousness, something more complicated than that. The specific recalibration of someone encountering in person a figure that has existed primarily as a story. Elijah walked to him directly, hand out. "Jordan Webb," he said. Jordan shook his hand with a grip that told Elijah several things immediately. He'd worked with his hands long enough for the grip to be automatic and strong, and he was trying not to show how much this moment meant, and he was not entirely succeeding. "Mr. Brooks?" "Elijah." He turned to Deshaun. "Deshaun Garrett, your father told me you were good." Deshaun's expression was the expression of a young man who had not yet learned to receive a compliment without visible processing time. "He said that?" "He also said you've been trying to get into electrical apprenticeship for 2 years. Patricia tells me you talked for 45 minutes about fuel diagnostics." "She kept asking questions," Deshaun said, slightly defensive in the way of someone surprised by their own depth. "I just answered them." "That's how it works," Elijah said. He turned to the third young man, Caleb Torres. Yes, sir. Caleb was quieter than the other two, watchful, with the stillness of someone who had learned early that observation was more reliable than assumption. He had, Elijah thought, the listening ear, or the beginning of it. Patricia tells me you diagnosed a failing injector pump on a fishing trawler by sound alone last summer. The owner had 3 other mechanics look at it. Caleb looked at the dock. They were looking at the wrong system, he said simply. They usually are, Elijah said. The 3 of them looked at him. He looked back at them. These 3 young men in their new jackets and their complicated mix of hope and wariness, standing on a dock where, 3 weeks ago, a crowd had laughed at a man with a toolbox. He thought about what he wanted to say to them and decided that now was not the time for speeches. There would be speeches enough in the next hour. What they needed now was something smaller and more direct. Patricia's program is real, he said. I've read every draft. I've pushed back on every part that wasn't right. It's real now. He paused. You're going to meet resistance inside that company. People who don't think you belong there, who'll treat the program like a courtesy and treat you like a favor. You're going to have to be undeniable. Not perfect, undeniable. There's a difference. He looked at each of them in turn. You know your work. Trust it. When someone tells you you're wrong, check. When they tell you you don't belong, get to work. Any questions? Jordan Webb said, How do you know when to push back and when to listen? Elijah thought about the engine room and the Helix engineer and the decision to look at the maintenance log instead of the display screens. When the evidence is on your side, push back. When you might be missing something, listen. The hard part is knowing which situation you're in. He paused. The way you learn the difference is by being wrong sometimes and paying attention to how you got there. Deshaun nodded slowly, turning this over. Caleb was watching Elijah with an expression that suggested he was filing every word in a place he intended to return to. Okay, Elijah said. Let's go listen to some speeches. Victoria spoke for 11 minutes. Elijah had learned over the past 3 weeks that she was capable of being precise when she decided precision mattered, and she had decided this mattered. She covered the program structure, the wage commitments, the advancement pathway that Patricia had defended in 2 separate board meetings against resistance that had been, by Patricia's account, vigorous and not always polite. She named the number, 212 pre-registrations, and let the room absorb it. She said that the program would prioritize demonstrated skill and the willingness to learn, and that Sterling Global was committing to a 5-year funding guarantee, which was the line that made the city officials in the 3rd row sit up slightly straighter. Then she said Elijah's name. He was standing at the edge of the gathered crowd, near the water, in the same sport coat he'd worn to the boardroom. When she said his name and the cameras and faces turned toward him, he did not move toward the microphone. He stayed where he was. I'm not going to make a speech, he said, clearly enough for the microphones to catch it from where he stood. I'm just going to say that I know 3 young men here today who are better at certain things than most of the people who will be managing them when they start. And I know 209 more who probably are too. He looked at Victoria. The program is a door. What you do after you walk through it is still on you. He looked at the cameras. That's all. Someone started clapping, then more people. It built into something genuine, and Elijah let it happen and didn't perform anything in response to it, just stood at the water's edge and let the moment be what it was. Patricia Osei appeared at his elbow. She had, over the course of their collaboration, emerged as exactly what he'd pegged her as in the boardroom, the person who made things. She was wearing a coat the color of a copper penny and had her reading glasses on, which he'd come to understand meant she was in working mode rather than presentation mode. 212, she said quietly, beside him. I heard. 43 of them are women, 28 are over 40. She paused. 7 are veterans. He looked at her sideways. You're going to tell me the program wasn't designed to accommodate all of those different situations. I'm going to tell you the program has to grow. She looked back at him levelly. Which is why I need you to stay involved. I'm a mechanic, Patricia. You're a mechanic who fixed my employer's boat and then spent 3 weeks redesigning our human capital strategy. She said it without irony, just naming the fact. I need your eye on this. Not full-time, not officially, But I need to know when the program is starting to drift, when it's becoming a credential program with a different credential, or a PR initiative with a longer timeline. I need someone who will read it the way you read a maintenance log, from the beginning, looking for what got deferred. He was quiet for a moment. On the dock, the official part of the event was concluding. Jordan and Deshaun and Caleb were being introduced to someone from Sterling's technical division, a woman in her 40s with the direct manner of an engineer who had gotten there by being right consistently. He watched the introductions with the focused attention he brought to new configurations, watching how the parts related to each other, whether the fit was right or whether something would need adjustment. Quarterly, he said. I'll look at the program data quarterly. You send me the numbers and the candidate progress reports, and I'll tell you if something's drifting. Monthly, Patricia said. Every 6 weeks. Done. She held out her hand. He shook it. Her grip was as direct as everything else about her. One more thing, she said. She reached into the leather folder she was carrying and produced an envelope. From Victoria. She said to give you this after the event, not before. He took the envelope. He looked at it without opening it. She said you'd make that face, Patricia said. What face? The face of someone deciding whether to be suspicious of a thing before they know what it is. He looked at Patricia. What is it? Open it and find out. I didn't read it. She paused. That's not true. I helped draft it. Open it. He opened it. Inside was a single page. Not a check, which had been his first assumption, but a document. A letter of agreement between Sterling Global Industries and Brooks Auto and Marine, formalizing a consulting arrangement for the apprenticeship program oversight. The terms were specific: 6-week review cycles, a defined scope of evaluation, and a compensation figure that was, he read it twice, more than his garage had cleared in its best quarter. He read the whole page, then he folded it and put it back in the envelope. Tell her I'll have my own version of this agreement drafted by end of week, he said, with different language in the liability section. Patricia looked at him for a moment. Then she did the thing that might have been a laugh. She said you'd say something like that too. She's getting better at reading people, Elijah said. She's always been good at reading people, Patricia said. She's getting better at being honest about what she reads. She tucked the folder under her arm. I'll look for your version Friday. She walked away toward the cluster of city officials who had been waiting for her attention with the patient energy of people who had important things to say and were wise enough to wait for the right moment. He found Marcus waiting at the garage when he got back, which was not unusual, but the way Marcus was waiting was standing in the bay with his arms crossed and a specific quality of intentionality that Elijah had been watching build for 2 weeks and had been planning to address. Sit down, Elijah said, before Marcus could speak. Marcus sat on the stool by the workbench. Elijah pulled the other stool from across the bay and sat across from him. The garage was quiet. No vehicles in. A slow Tuesday afternoon. You've been waiting to say something, Elijah said. Marcus looked at his hands. He was 19, and in the way of many 19-year-olds, he had more going on internally than he reliably expressed, and the gap between what was happening inside and what he managed to say was sometimes significant. But he'd been building toward this for long enough that it was apparently ready. I want to be in the program, he said. The Sterling one. Elijah looked at him. Tell me why. Because I'm good, Marcus said. It came out with a directness that surprised even Marcus. Elijah could see the slight surprise of it cross his own face. I know I'm good. You've told me I'm good. I can diagnose. You know I can diagnose. Last month, the Kelsey boat. I know what you did with the Kelsey boat, Elijah said. I was there. Then you know, Marcus said. And I've been handing over sockets for 11 months because I didn't know there was a door. He met Elijah's eyes with the specific courage of young people saying a true thing to someone whose opinion they value. Is there a door? Elijah had been planning to have this conversation for 3 weeks. He had been planning it because he'd known, from the first moment Patricia mentioned the program's structure, that Marcus was exactly the kind of person it was designed for. And he'd been turning over, in the careful way he turned over everything that mattered, how to say that without making it sound like charity, and without making it sound like Marcus had been wasting his time in this garage. There's a door, Elijah said. I talked to Patricia about you already. Marcus went still. You did? 2 weeks ago. I told her about the Kelsey boat and about the Meridian alternator you diagnosed in January and about the way you approach a new system. You look at the whole thing before you touch anything, which most people don't do and which takes years to learn. He paused. She wants to meet you Thursday morning. Here, not at the office. She said she'd come to you. Marcus was doing the thing where he was trying very hard not to show the size of what he was feeling. He was not entirely succeeding, which was fine. I wasn't wasting your time here, Marcus said. It came out slightly defensive, which meant it was something he'd been worried about. No, Elijah said simply. You were learning. There's a difference. He paused. But you know things now that need a bigger arena than this garage can give you. That's not a criticism of the garage. It's just the shape of what comes next. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Outside, a car passed on the street. The compressor cycled on, ran for a few seconds, cycled off. Will you still... But... Marcus started. Stopped. What? Will you still... I mean, if I'm in the program, can I still... He was struggling with the sentence. You can still call me, Elijah said. You can still come here. This doesn't close. He said it with the same evenness he brought to everything, because he meant it with the same completeness. I'm not losing an employee. I'm watching someone go where they're supposed to go. Marcus was quiet. Then he nodded, several times, with the energy of someone whose body has taken over from their voice because the voice is temporarily unavailable. Okay, he said. Yeah, Elijah said. He stood up. He clapped Marcus once on the shoulder. A brief, solid contact, the language of men who are not sentimental about the things they're most sentimental about, and went to put on his work clothes because there was a fuel pump that needed replacing before 5 o'clock, and sentiment didn't change the schedule. Tolkien. Nia knew something was different before he told her. She had the particular sensitivity of children raised in close quarters with a single parent, attuned to the frequencies of one person's emotional life in the way that you attune to an instrument you've listened to every day of your life. She noticed things. She didn't always name them immediately, but she filed them, and then she asked about them when the moment was right. The moment she chose was after dinner while he was washing dishes and she was drying. She had instituted this arrangement at age 8 on the logic that if he cooked, she should help clean, and the logic had been sound enough that he'd never argued with it. The press thing was today, she said. Yes. How was it? Fine. She dried a plate, set it on the stack, reached for the next one. Jordan and Deshawn were there? He had told her about them. Not everything, but enough, in the incremental way he'd tried to share things with her since she was old enough to understand. Not simplified, not dramatized, just honest. They were there. How did they seem? He thought about Jordan's grip and Deshawn's careful effort not to show how much the moment meant, and Caleb's quiet watching. Like people who've been standing at a door for a long time and are still not entirely sure it's open. Nia dried another plate. Are they going to be okay? I think so. Is Marcus going to be okay? He looked at her. She was looking at the plate in her hands, not at him, which meant she'd been sitting with this question for a while and was asking it sideways to make it easier for him to answer. Patricia's meeting him Thursday, he said. He's more than ready. He's been ready. Will you miss him? Yes. She nodded, accepting this. She put the plate on the stack. Dad? Yeah. Are you going to be okay? He stopped washing. He looked at his daughter, at her 10-year-old seriousness, and her mother's cheekbones, and the lopsided ponytail that she still sometimes attempted on her own, and the way she was looking at him with the direct, undefended concern of someone who loved him without conditions. He thought about the letter to the girl in South Carolina. Necessary and okay are not the same thing, and sometimes you have to move on the first while you waited for the second to catch up. He was okay. He'd been okay through things that might reasonably have produced a different answer, because okay was not a feeling so much as a practice, the daily choice to be present and capable and honest, and to keep moving through whatever the landscape was. Yeah, he said. I'm okay. She looked at him for a moment with those level, taking things in eyes. Then she handed him the dish towel. I finished the field trip report, she said. I got a 94. He took the dish towel. He felt the specific compound happiness that visits parents unexpectedly, made of pride and tenderness and time and the overwhelming ordinariness of a child handing you a dish towel in a kitchen that smells of dinner. And he let himself feel it fully, the way he'd learned to let good things be what they were without immediately moving past them. 94, he said. What happened to the other 6 points? Nia's expression achieved the precise combination of affronted and amused that was one of her most accomplished performances. She said my conclusion was underdeveloped. Was she right? A pause. The pause of someone applying honest judgment to themselves. Maybe, Nia said. A little. Fix the conclusion, he said. Not for the grade. Because if the conclusion is underdeveloped, the argument isn't finished. She thought about this seriously, the way she thought about most things. Okay, she said. I'd read it, he said. After you revise it. She nodded with the gravity of someone entering into an agreement. Then she went to her room to work on the conclusion, and he finished the dishes alone, and the kitchen was warm and quiet, and outside the city moved through its night the way cities do, immense and various and mostly invisible to itself, full of people working and resting and struggling and managing, each of them the center of a story that the others couldn't see. He dried his hands. He thought about 212 people who had registered in 9 days for a door that hadn't existed 3 weeks ago. He thought about his father, 31 years in the same classification, who had trained 18 people and watched them all move past him, and who had never made his son feel that this was the way the world should work, only that it was the way the world did work, and that the correct response was to be excellent anyway, so that something, somewhere, would eventually have to give. Something had given, not everything, not enough. The system was still what it was in all the places the cameras hadn't been rolling, and one press event and one apprenticeship program, and one viral clip of one man with a toolbox walking up one gangway didn't change the fundamental architecture of who got access and who didn't. But 212 people had seen a door open, and 3 young men were going to walk through it, and a 19-year-old named Marcus was going to meet Patricia Osei on Thursday and have his life pointed in a different direction. And a girl in South Carolina had gotten a letter about necessary and okay that she might keep or might throw away or might read one night years from now when she was standing at her own gangway, trying to decide whether to walk up. These were not the same thing as everything, but they were not nothing. He put the dish towel on the rack. He went to read what Nia had written. The revision of Nia's conclusion was, in Elijah's honest assessment, significantly better than the original. She had gone back to her room after dinner with the specific focused energy she reserved for things she'd decided mattered, and she had emerged 40 minutes later with 3 new paragraphs that didn't just summarize what she'd already said, but actually extended the argument, connecting the dinosaur exhibit to the human body section in a way that her teacher had apparently not suggested and that Nia had arrived at entirely on her own. She read it to him standing in the kitchen doorway with her socks on the wrong feet, which she always did when she was thinking too hard about something else to notice her feet, and he listened to every word. "That's better," he said when she finished. "How much better?" "The kind of better that changes the grade." She considered whether to show the satisfaction this produced, decided against it on principle, and went to bed. He stood in the kitchen after she was gone and thought about her for a while, about the specific and astonishing fact of her, this person he'd been building a life around for 10 years, who was becoming, with every passing month, more distinctly herself, more particular, more complete. He didn't know who she would be at 20 or 30, but he knew the shape of her thinking and the quality of her stubbornness and the way she applied honest judgment to herself when she could have gotten away with not doing it, and he thought, whatever she becomes, she'll be good at the becoming. It was the only inheritance he'd been certain he could give her. Not money, not status, not connections. Those were things the world distributed according to rules he'd been fighting against his entire life. But the practice of honest work, the habit of looking straight at what was in front of you, the understanding that undeniable was better than impressive, and that necessary sometimes had to come before okay. He'd given her that. He was still giving it to her, every day, in the 10,000 ordinary ways that nobody filmed and nobody wrote letters about. He turned off the kitchen light. The orthodontist appointment was on a Thursday morning, 6 weeks after the doc. Dr. Patel examined Nia's crossbite with the focused patience of someone who had looked at a great many 10-year-old mouths and had opinions about all of them. Nia sat in the chair with the particular dignity of a person enduring an indignity, and Elijah sat in the corner of the examination room and watched. "We'll start the process in January," Dr. Patel said. "I'd estimate 18 months for the primary correction." She looked at Elijah over her glasses. "You have the estimate we discussed. 4,200, he said. "That's correct." He had the money. He had the money because of the double rate and the completion bonus from Dana Reyes, which had arrived in his account the morning after the dock and which he'd looked at for a long moment before transferring the exact amount of Nia's braces estimate into a separate account and labeling it with her name. The consulting agreement with Sterling Global had added to what existed on either side of that number, but the braces money was its own thing. Separate, specific, the reason he'd answered a phone call at midnight and driven to a marina and walked up a gangway while people laughed. It had always been that simple. It had always been about this: a 10-year-old in an examination chair who needed something and a father who was going to make sure she got it. "January," he said. "We'll be ready." But Nia, from the examination chair, said, "Will it hurt?" "Initially," Dr. Patel said, with the honest directness that Elijah had always appreciated about her. "Less than you expect. And then you stop noticing." Nia looked at her father. He looked back at her. She nodded once, the same nod she'd been giving him since she was old enough to nod, the one that meant, "Okay, I trust this, let's proceed." He drove her to school after the appointment. She was quiet in the passenger seat in the way she was quiet when she was processing something, her library book open on her knee but unread, her eyes on the passing street. "Dad," she said, a block from the school. "Yeah." "At the press thing. Were you nervous?" He thought about standing at the water's edge while the cameras turned toward him, about saying what he'd said and staying where he was. "No." "Why not?" "Because I wasn't there to impress anyone. I was there because Jordan and Deshawn asked me to be." He pulled up to the school curb. "It's easier when it's not about you." She thought about this with the seriousness it deserved. Then she unbuckled her seatbelt, picked up her backpack, and opened the door. She was halfway out when she stopped and turned back. "I think you were nervous a little bit," she said. "And you did it anyway. That's braver than not being nervous." She got out and closed the door and walked up the school steps without looking back, which was a thing she had started doing recently, not looking back, moving forward with the confidence of someone who trusted that the ground would be there under her feet. He sat at the curb for a moment after she disappeared inside. Then he drove to the garage. Marcus met Patricia Osei on a Thursday morning and talked to her for 2 hours, which was 90 minutes longer than either of them had scheduled. Elijah knew this because Patricia texted him at 11:15. "Still going. He knows things. Call you tonight." She called at 8. "He's in," she said. "First cohort, January start." "How'd he seem?" "Like someone who's been doing a job that was too small for him for too long and has just realized it." A pause. "He also said to tell you, and I'm quoting directly, tell him I'll still come fix stuff on Saturdays." Elijah was at the kitchen table. The consulting agreement he'd been reviewing spread in front of him. His version, with the revised liability language, which Patricia had accepted with minimal negotiation, and a comment that suggested she'd expected him to push harder. "Tell him Saturdays are fine," he said, "but he should charge me for it." Patricia made the sound that might have been a laugh. "I will absolutely tell him that." She shifted. He could hear papers moving. "The second cohort applications are being processed now. We're at 341. Victoria wants to expand the intake for January from 12 to 20. Can you support 20 with quality mentorship? If you help me identify 3 more external mentors who are like you, Buck, people with deep practical knowledge and the willingness to be honest about what the program needs, yes." He thought about it. He thought about Gerald, who was 71 and whose hands had given out, but whose mind was still the sharpest diagnostic instrument he knew. He thought about a woman named Celine Park, who ran the marine electrical operation 2 piers down from his fleet contract, and who was, in his estimation, the best in the region at what she did, and who had never once been asked to teach what she knew to anyone who would carry it forward. He thought about a recently retired Navy Chief Petty Officer named Raymond Okafor, who had serviced submarine propulsion systems for 22 years and who was currently, as far as Elijah knew, playing cards and going slowly insane from the inactivity.
I can give you 3 names, he said, but I'm not recruiting them for you. I'll make the introduction, and then it's between you and them. Understood. Another pause. Elijah. Yeah. This is working. I want you to know that.
Not the optics, the actual thing. Jordan Webb tested at senior technician level last week on the mechanical systems evaluation.
He's been doing this in his head for years without the vocabulary for it. When we gave him the vocabulary, he just expanded. She sounded, for the first time in his experience of her, something other than strategic. She sounded moved.
Deshaun Garrett spent 4 hours last Tuesday walking Caleb Torres through electrical diagnostic methodology, and I watched it and I thought, this is what it looks like when the right people find each other. He was quiet for a moment. He thought about Howard Webb and Gerald and his own uncle, and the long chain of people who had passed things forward through the exact same mechanism. Patient, willing transmission from one person who knew to another person who was ready to know.
Yeah, he said. That's what it looks like. Thank you, she said. Not with the professional courtesy that was her default register, with actual weight. Don't thank me, he said. Build it so it lasts past the gratitude. She said good night and hung up. He sat at the kitchen table with the consulting agreement in front of him and the house quiet around him. Nia asleep. The compressor in the garage below ticking as it cooled. The city outside doing its vast and mostly invisible work. He signed the agreement. He put it in an envelope. He went to bed. What? Career day at Nia's school was in February. He had known it was coming. It had been on the kitchen calendar for 6 weeks, written in Nia's handwriting in the specific blue marker she used for things that were not negotiable. When he'd asked, casually, what career day involved, she had explained with thorough patience that parents came and talked about their work, and that she had signed him up, and that it was on February 12th, and that he should wear the sport coat. The sport coat, he said. The good one, she clarified. Not the one with the button that's different. He stood in front of 22 fourth graders on a Tuesday morning in February, in the good sport coat, in a classroom that smelled of construction paper and the particular institutional warmth of elementary schools, and he looked at the rows of faces looking back at him. They were, collectively, one of the more directly evaluating audiences he had ever addressed, which was saying something given the recent field of competition. Nia was in the second row. She was wearing her blue sweater. She had her hands folded on her desk, and her posture was the posture of someone who was carefully not showing how important this was. My name is Elijah Brooks, he said. I'm a mechanic. I fix engines. He paused. Specifically, I fix things that other people have decided can't be fixed. 22 faces considered this. A boy in the front row, small, with enormous glasses, and the expression of someone who processed everything through a very fine analytical filter, raised his hand immediately. What kind of engines? Cars mostly, trucks, boats, anything with a combustion system or a drivetrain. He paused. 6 weeks ago I fixed a yacht that 30 engineers couldn't fix. The room's energy shifted in the way rooms shift when something unexpected and interesting has been introduced. House, said the boy with the glasses. I read the maintenance log, Elijah said. A silence. That's it? Said another child, a girl with her hair in 2 puffs, her skepticism both immediate and entirely reasonable. That's where I started, he said, because the maintenance log told the story of the machine, everything that had happened to it, everything that had been fixed and everything that hadn't been fixed yet. And in there, 8 months back, someone had written down a problem that nobody had gotten around to solving. And that small unsolved problem, over 8 months, had grown into a problem that shut the entire system down. He looked at them. That happens a lot. Not just in machines. Small things that get deferred. Small problems that people decide aren't urgent enough to fix right now. They don't go away. They grow. The analytical boy had his hand up again. Elijah nodded at him. What if nobody had written it down? Then I might not have found it, or it would have taken longer. He paused. That's why the person who wrote it down mattered. They were a dock technician, not an engineer, not a systems specialist, just someone doing their job carefully enough to notice something and record it. And nobody listened to them. He let that land. One of the things I've learned is that the person most likely to notice what's wrong is the person closest to the machine,
Not always the person with the most credentials, the person who is paying attention every day. Mrs. Okafor, Nia's teacher, the same name as Raymond Okafor by coincidence or the universe's sense of humor, was standing near the door with the expression of someone who had heard a great many career day presentations and was recalibrating her expectations of this one. A girl near the back raised her hand. She was quiet, with the careful posture of a child who spent a lot of time watching before she participated. "Is it hard?" she said. "Being a mechanic?" "Some of it," he said. "The physical part is hard sometimes. Working in tight spaces, long hours, cold mornings." He paused. "But the hardest part isn't the work. The hardest part is that people will sometimes look at you and decide what you're capable of before you've had the chance to show them." He said this to 22 fourth graders with the same directness he'd used with Victoria Sterling and Patricia Osai and the man in the grocery store, because they were old enough to hear it and young enough for it to matter in the right way. And when that happens, and it will happen to most of you, in different ways for different reasons, you have a choice. You can let their assessment be the end of it, or you can pick up your toolbox and get to work. The room was very quiet. Nia, in the second row, was looking at him with those level dark eyes. She was not performing anything. She was just listening the way she always listened, completely, filing everything, storing it in the place where she kept the things that mattered. "My dad says," said the analytical boy in the front row slowly, like he was connecting something, "that sometimes people decide stuff about you because of how you look." "Yes," Elijah said. "Does that make you mad?" He thought about the dock and the laughter and the particular quality of Victoria Sterling's dismissal at the top of the gangway. The ease of it, the way it had cost her nothing in that moment. He thought about his father in 31 years of the same classification. He thought about the man from Birmingham who'd watched the clip 4 times. "For a minute," he said, "and then I have work to do, and the work is more important than the anger." He paused. "I'm not saying don't feel it. Feel it. It's real, and it's valid, and it's telling you something true about the world. But don't let it be the thing that stops you. Use it if you can, and then get to work." The girl near the back with the careful posture had her hand up again. "What if you're really good at something?" she said, "but nobody can tell yet?" He looked at her. In the second row, he saw Nia look at her too. "Then you keep doing it," he said, "and you find the people who are also doing it, who understand what you understand, and you learn from them and teach them, and you don't stop. Because sooner or later—" He paused. He thought about how to finish this in a way that was true rather than comfortable. "Sooner or later, something breaks that only you can fix, and then everyone can tell." The girl in the back nodded slowly. He had the sense, the specific, quiet sense, that she had asked the question for a reason, that she was already somewhere, doing something, that nobody had recognized yet. He hoped someone recognized it. He hoped she found the people who understood. He hoped she found her maintenance log, the record of all her work, kept carefully, waiting for someone who knew how to read it. In March, 3 months after the dock, Gerald Alcides called. He called on a Sunday morning, which was Gerald's preferred time for calls of any significance, because on Sundays, he said, people actually had room in their heads to hear what was being said. "I have been reading about you," Gerald said. His accent carried 30 years of American life over a Haitian foundation, and it had a quality that Elijah had always found steadying, specific and unhurried, each word carrying exactly its intended weight. "I've been reading about myself too," Elijah said. "It's strange." "Yes," Gerald agreed, as though strangeness were a reasonable and expected feature of reality. "I have also been receiving calls." "From who?" "Patricia Osei, 3 times. Elijah smiled. He was at the kitchen table with coffee, Sunday morning quiet around him, Nia still asleep. "She's persistent." "She is very direct," Gerald said, which in his vocabulary was a significant compliment. "She asked me to be a mentor in your program. I told her it was your program and not my program, and she told me that was a distinction I could discuss with you." A pause, warm and dry. "So I am discussing it with you." "It's your program too," Elijah said. "If you want it to be. Everything I know about marine systems I learned from you. The program runs on what you taught me." A silence. Gerald's silences were never empty. They were the silences of someone turning something over carefully, examining it from multiple angles before responding. "My hands," Gerald said. "Mentorship isn't all hands," Elijah said. "The best thing you ever gave me wasn't anything you did with your hands. It was the way you looked at a machine before you touched it. You can teach that. You can sit next to Jordan Webb or Caleb Torres and talk while they work, and it will be worth more than 6 months of technical training." Another silence. Longer. "This Jordan Webb," Gerald said. "Howard's grandson?" "Yes." "Howard was a good man," Gerald said quietly. "Very good mechanic. Very patient teacher." He paused. "He would have liked this." "I know," Elijah said. "Send me Patricia Osei's number," Gerald said. "I will call her Monday." "She'll call you first. She's monitoring her phone on Sundays." Gerald made a sound that was absolutely a laugh. "She is very direct," he said again, with even more appreciation than the first time. They talked for another 20 minutes, about the garage, about the Eastport fleet, about a fishing vessel Gerald had heard about through the marina network that had an unusual vibration in the drive shaft that nobody had correctly identified. Elijah listened to the description and thought about it and said what he thought, and Gerald listened and said what he thought, and it was the conversation they'd been having for 20 years in various forms. Two people who understood the same language, speaking it. Before he hung up, Gerald said, "Your father would have liked this too, all of it." Elijah was quiet for a moment. Outside, the March light was coming through the kitchen window, thinner than it would be in a month, still carrying winter's reserve. "I know," he said. "He was a very good man," Gerald said. "He raised a very good man." "Gerald." "Yes?" "Thank you. For the garage. For everything before the garage." "You paid me for the garage," Gerald said, with the precision of a man who kept his accounts clear. "Not what I meant." "I know what you meant," Gerald said. "You're welcome." He paused. "Call me when the first cohort finishes. I want to hear how they did." "I will." He put the phone down. He sat in the Sunday morning quiet, and the coffee cooled in front of him, and somewhere in the back of the house he heard Nia moving, the particular sound of her waking, a slow, shuffling progress toward consciousness that she had made every morning of her life in this apartment. She appeared in the kitchen doorway in her pajamas, hair completely extraordinary, with the squinting dignity of someone who has not yet made their peace with morning. "Who were you talking to?" she said. "Gerald." She went to the refrigerator and got the orange juice and poured herself a glass with the careful concentration of someone who was not yet fully operational. She sat across from him at the table. "Is he going to be a mentor?" she said. "How do you know about that?" "I hear things," she said. "Is he?" "Yes?" She drank her orange juice. She looked at him across the table with those level eyes, somewhat softened by sleep, but fundamentally unchanged. Still direct, still taking things in, still the eyes of someone who would look at the world straight for the rest of her life. "Good," she said. And that was enough. That was exactly the right amount. He got up and made her breakfast. The eggs she liked. The toast cut diagonally because she'd informed him at age 6 that diagonal was structurally superior to parallel and had never reversed this position. And she sat at the table and woke up slowly and read 3 pages of her library book while she waited. And the garage below was quiet on a Sunday, and the city outside was doing its Sunday things. It was an ordinary morning. It was, in the way that ordinary mornings are when you have managed to build a life worth living in, something close to perfect. On a Tuesday in April, Jordan Webb crawled into the engine room of a 40-foot charter boat at Harborview Marina, alone, with a maintenance log in one hand and a flashlight clamped between his teeth, and spent 40 minutes finding a problem that had been misdiagnosed by 2 other technicians. He wrote his findings in a clear, direct report and emailed it to his sterling global supervisor and copied Patricia Osei. The diagnosis was correct. The supervisor confirmed it. Patricia forwarded it to Elijah without comment, and then added at the bottom of the email, "Howard would have liked this." Elijah read it in the garage, on his phone, standing beside a Tacoma that needed a water pump. He read it once. Then he put his phone in his pocket and picked up his wrench. Deshaun Garrett, 2 weeks later, identified an electrical fault in a harbor tender's navigation system that had been causing intermittent failures for 3 months. He found it in 40 minutes. He explained it to the boat's captain in terms the captain could understand, which was a skill that had nothing to do with technical knowledge and everything to do with the willingness to meet someone where they were. The captain requested Deshaun by name for the next inspection. Caleb Torres, whose quietness had initially been read by some of the Sterling engineers as uncertainty, was reassessed after he sat with a senior engineer through a complex propulsion system diagnosis and said nothing for 2 hours except, at the precise right moment, check the coupling, which turned out to be correct and which sent the senior engineer home that evening in a thoughtful mood that lasted several days. These were not viral moments. Nobody filmed them. They didn't have 11 million views, and they didn't generate press statements or industry coverage. They were the ordinary operation of competent people doing their work well, which is the way most things that matter actually happen, not in a single dramatic moment, but in the accumulated weight of daily excellence, unremarked and unrecorded, building towards something that only becomes visible when you step back far enough to see the whole. Elijah stepped back far enough on a Thursday evening in April, standing at the end of Pier 7 at Harborview Marina after his fleet maintenance check. The harbor was moving in the late afternoon light, the water doing what water always did, constant, indifferent, honest. And the eclipse was in its slip to the north, and the pilot boat he'd inspected was 2 slips down, and somewhere across the marina Jordan Webb was writing a report in the clear, direct language of someone who had found the beginning of a problem and followed it to its end. He thought about 0.31 millimeters, about how small a thing has to be to eventually stop everything, and about how small a thing has to be to eventually change everything, if it moves in the right direction and the right people pay attention. He picked up his toolbox. He walked back to his truck. He drove home. Nia had a math test Friday that she'd been preparing for with the systematic focus she brought to things she found difficult and had decided to conquer. She would want to go over the last section after dinner. He'd need to remember where they'd left off, fractions into decimals, the conversion logic that she'd been turning over for a week. He remembered. He always remembered the things that were his to carry. He drove through the city, the ordinary city, the streets he'd driven 1,000 times, past the elementary school and the grocery store and the laundromat with its 3 always running machines. And he thought about his father and Gerald and Howard Webb and the 43 minutes in an engine room and the man in Birmingham and the girl in South Carolina and 212 people who had seen a door open. He thought about Nia, diagonal toast, the blue sweater, the conclusion that became better when she went back and told the truth of it. He thought about necessary and okay, and how the distance between them closes, and how it closes not in a single moment, but in the daily, patient, undramatic work of people who refuse to be stopped by the size of what's in front of them. He pulled up to the garage. He parked. He sat for a moment. The hand-painted sign was above him. Brooks, Auto, and Marine, Gerald's letters, touched up twice, still standing. The light was on inside. The compressor was running. Everything was as it was supposed to be. He got out of the truck. He was home. He was, as he had always been, as he had been on the dock and in the boardroom and on the pier and in the grocery store and at the kitchen table on every ordinary night, exactly himself, no more, no less. A man who listened to machines, a man who read the maintenance log, a man who walked up gangways when people told him he didn't belong and got to work and trusted the work to say what needed to be said. A father, a mechanic, a man whose quiet truth in the end turned out to be enough, more than enough.